In her past life, Empress Dowager Li, who was rumored to have killed the king and forged an edict, killed concubines with a cane, harmed imperial heirs, held young grandchildren hostage, and intended to proclaim herself emperor, jumped from the city wall and made a decision. In this life, Li Sui looked down upon it. A lifetime of serving the country and the family only brought about slander from the world. The city walls leaped, and now she only wants her life to belong to Li Sui. Keywords of the novel. Chang'an Qing no pop-ups. Download the complete set of Chang'an Qing TXT, and read the latest chapters of Chang'an Qing. Chapter 1. Jianzhang Palace Transformation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Jianzhang Palace Transformation. In the first year of Jianzhang, Chang'an in early autumn carries a hint of summer heat, with a gentle breeze carrying a warm breath. It peeks into the window and brushes past the scroll in its hand. In the silence, under the eaves of the distant city tower, the thick and distant copper bell gradually rippled into one's ears, reminding people that this Chang'an city had already guarded the two dynasties. Accompanied by the sparse chirping of insects under the window, Li Sui's slender and jade-like index finger leisurely caressed the 2 lines of small characters on the book. 13 can weave vegetables, 14 can learn to cut clothes, 15 strings of Kongho, 16 recitations of poetry in books, 17 is the wife of a ruler, with constant sorrow in her heart. Li Sui wanted to smile, but it was accompanied by a hint of casual mockery. Why is it not like this? The Empress Dowager. A sound sounded tentatively in his ear, and Li Sui under the window just regained his senses. On his side, under the warm light of the 8 treasure tassels inlaid with precious glass lamps, a man stood tall in jade, dressed in a crimson robe and official attire. Coupled with a flawless jade belt on his waist and a delicate silver fish bag, he exuded a white and handsome appearance, with a youthful and handsome aura in his eyebrows. The Yuan court is here. With a gentle smile on Li Sui's lips, he waved his hand and saw a palace maid carrying high-class Su brocade chairs. However, the young man who was called the Yuan court had an anxious gaze and ignored the palace maid beside him. He bowed to Li Sui sitting on the throne and said, "Empress Dowager, the Prince of Luoyang has formed alliances with the Forbidden Army and won over important officials in the court. This time, taking advantage of the opportunity to mourn the late emperor, she has stationed heavy troops outside Chang'an city. Her malicious intentions are clearly revealed, and we kindly ask the Empress Dowager to make early plans." After speaking, the man raised his head and said firmly, "Longzhou is not far from Chang'an. I and the commander of the Longwu army are willing to fight to death. Empress Dowager who will take His Majesty to Longzhou and make other plans." Looking at the young student in front of her who was personally promoted by her, Li Sui was in harmony with Yu Rongyan. She knew very well that now that De Liang had been overthrown by her own hands, the era of hereditary power in the past was gradually fading away. From the moment when she ruled out public opinion and personally criticized the cloth-clad scholar from a humble family background, who had been farming for generations, as the Hanlin, the high wall of the family's powerful family was already cracked. Under her protection and with the recommendation of the Yuan court, now the majority of the court is composed of Confucian scholars from humble backgrounds, who are in a strong position with aristocratic families. It seems that only the Yuan court is standing before her, but behind the Yuan court, there are countless disciples from humble backgrounds who are loyal to her as the Empress Dowager. Thinking this way, she can be considered to have left something behind in her life. Although I came from Longxi, I was born in Chang'an and have been around for more than 40 years now. Humanity has fallen to its roots. Where else will I go at this age? Although Li Sui said these words, following the gentle light of the palace lamp, one could see from her stunning appearance that time had clearly not left a trace on her body. Only her eyes added a bit of loneliness and competence in seeing through the world. At this point, Li Sui's eyes were filled with a peaceful smile as he turned to look at Yuan Ting. "Yuan Ting, you should understand that Chang'an is the foundation of our Daliang. Once your Majesty and I leave, I don't know when they will return. The Empress Dowager. Yuan Tingfang spoke, but was interrupted by Li Sui's hand. She calmly stood up and walked to a window with the help of Yunu. She looked out at the layers of palace eaves and said decisively, "The emperor fled, and the people perished. Li Sui, am alive, so I cannot tolerate the emperor who abandoned the country and fled." Upon hearing this, Yuan Ting, standing silently behind him, looked at the resolute woman under the window who was full of beauty and cherished the world. Her heart trembled, and she couldn't help feeling sad. Finally, she suppressed her tears in her eyes and arched her hand firmly, saying, "I swear to advance and retreat with you." Li Sui turned his head to look at the Yuan court in front of him. With his astonishing talent and knowledge, he was not only a Hanlin attendant, but also a marquis and a prime minister. Unfortunately, the world was shallow and could not see his talent. They only saw his appearance and saw his rising clouds, which led to his criticism as her favored minister under her skirt, all with verbal and written criticism. Almost at the same time, a thunderous roar sounded muffled, and the tide came from far to near. Accompanied by the sound were the footsteps of the Nian Nu swiftly striking the curtain. Seeing the complex and flickering expression on Nian Nu's face, and recalling his voice just now, Li Sui was already aware of it. The Empress Dowager. In her gaze, Nian Nu pressed a tear in her eyes, but suddenly knelt down. At this moment, the people in the hall seemed to understand something and all knelt down with it. The Nian Nu's figure trembled under his feet, and even though his words were calm, he could still hear the uncontrollable choking inside. Luoyang King, forcing the palace. Seeing the figure of the person in the Hall of Harmony trembled, and listening to the sound of the window getting closer and closer, Li Sui seemed to have seen the towering flames falling from the lattice window with the silk veil attached onto the wall. After all, it still came. Li Sui smiled and remained calm as if nothing had happened. "Keep going." Upon hearing the sound, Nian Nu stopped waiting and buried his head deeply, not teaching Li Sui to see his tears. The commander of the Wanqi left camp, Gao Gao, led his troops to launch a surprise attack on the Yulin camp. He beheaded 3 generals, Li Zheng, Li Yao, and Chen Zhen, and rebelled against the Yulin army, attacking the Xuande Gate. Wu Xing also led his troops to attack the White Beast Gate. At this moment, they have gathered at the Lingyan Pavilion, and now the Prince of Luoyang is leading his troops towards the inner palace. Upon hearing that Nian Nu was almost unable to cry, Li Sui leaned aside and turned to look out the window. The night fell low, and the sky was still tinged with a faint fish belly white. At this moment, the Chang'an star was hanging in the curtain, emitting a faint light. "I'm curious about how they fought against the orphan in the proclamation." In a low sob, Li Sui smiled, his voice appearing particularly clear. Although it was a question, it was also particularly indifferent. The Empress Dowager. Upon hearing the hesitation in Nian Nu's words, Li Sui turned his head and felt the gentle pressure in Li Sui's eyes. Nian Nu immediately straightened his back, silently lowered his head, and tried to suppress the choking. He read each word clearly. The Li family of the current dynasty, although from a prestigious family, had a non-docile nature. They were jealous when they first entered the court, refused to let others down, concealed their sleeves and worked slander, and were seductive and could only deceive their masters. They also defiled the palace walls, kept a female rooster in charge of the mourning, harbored evil intentions, harmed loyalty and good deeds, killed the emperor and corrected his edicts, pecked the emperor's heirs, and stole divine weapons. Now, they also wanted to take the young emperor hostage. The court was restructured, and both gods and humans suffered from diseases, which were not allowed by heaven and earth. Okay, that's a great article. Upon hearing Li Sui's emotionless praise, everyone in the hall lowered their heads in confusion and unease. The next moment, they saw that Li Sui had already walked towards the outside of the hall in a hurry. "Please invite your majesty." As he spoke, Li Sui looked at the Yuan court who was following him and said, "Draft an edict to appoint Han Yuan Ting, the Hanlin attendant, as the left assistant minister of the Imperial Secretariat and concurrently as the Minister of Personnel, and bestow the title of Duke of Liang. A light and ethereal sentence shocked everyone. Everyone present at this moment knew that Han Shizhong, who was only in his 30s, had easily ascended to the position of Prime Minister, due to this edict. At this moment, Li Sui no longer cared about the gaze of the world, because she knew that today's battle was not only between her and the King of Luoyang, but also between the humble family and the aristocratic family. In today's game, she can only win but not lose. She wants to use this victory to completely dissolve the situation of aristocratic families controlling the court, leaving a peaceful and prosperous era for her descendants that is not constrained by others but can fulfill her aspirations. And these rely on the Yuan court, as well as countless humble heroes behind him. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Using Death as a Game. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Using death as a game. Upon arriving at the Xuanwu Gate Tower, Li Sui had replaced himself with the magnificent phoenix crown, which had been woven by hundreds of skilled women in the palace for several months, on the day of her promotion to Empress Dowager during the new dynasty grand ceremony. It was a magnificent but overwhelming attire. Looking down at the city tower, the light of the armor almost illuminated the entire tower, and the clusters of torches almost dyed the night sky red. With a loud roar, the city gate suddenly opened, and in the next moment, people like ants rushed in towards the palace gate, followed by screams of surprise and the sound of slaughter advancing like a tide of the sea. The young Emperor Ayu, who was still in his swaddling clothes, was awakened by the sound and immediately burst into tears, buzzing around Li Sui's ear. Compared to the panic of the crowd, Li Sui, who was standing on the city tower, had a calm expression as if he had only come to climb a high mountain to admire the scenery tonight. Feeling the frightened wet nurse patting and comforting her grandson behind her, Li Sui turned to extend her hand, and the wet nurse quickly trembled and placed the child in Li Sui's arms. Li Sui didn't care about the piercing crying of his grandson in his arms. He just gently patted and comforted Yu's small body, calmly opening his lips towards the distance, as if telling a distant story. Ayu, take a look, this is your land, Oing's land. Compared to the deafening cries in the palace, the Danfengmen Street in the distance is calm and tranquil. The lights of the people's homes will not dim due to tonight's slaughter. Tomorrow, they will still open the door to live their own lives, and these people standing at the top of the Daliang mountain do not know where they will be. In my life, I have been a woman and an empress without any regrets, but being a wife and mother alone was a mistake, a complete defeat. As he spoke, Li Sui looked at the little person in his arms, with a faint smile on his lips. He pushed a 1-meter pill into the child's mouth with his fingertips, and then looked outside the city, feeling a different state of mind. At this moment, Yuan Ting's eyes on the side were filled with a hint of sadness, anger, and impatience. He looked at Li Sui approaching and was about to speak up. How could the Empress Dowager, who wielded immense power over the court and the opposition, make such a lament? Accompanied by the crisp sound of armor, the man's thick and powerful voice pierced through the night sky and reached Li Sui's ears. Turning his head, Yang Che, the king of Luoyang, dressed in military attire and full of energy, stood not far away, enjoying the trembling kneeling obedience of countless palace attendants. Behind him, Li Sui saw those aristocratic officials who had already turned sides and dared not look at her, including her own uncles and nephews. At a glance, everyone bowed their heads, only she and Yang Che stood tall on the city tower. It's like a game. In the past, she and he were close friends, but in the end, they walked away from each other and revealed their murderous intentions, never giving up. Although Yang Che is no different from her now, at an age of no confusion, she still has the handsome and timeless appearance she used to have, except for the added experience and composure of time. Prince Luoyang, don't come safely. As he spoke, Li Sui returned Ayu in his arms to his wet nurse's hands. Yuan Ting beside him looked coldly at Yang Che, and with his signal, the Lanwu army had already drawn their swords and stood guard by Li Sui's side. Yang Che in the distance watched this scene with a sneer in his breath, but with a light signal, someone blocked the way and taught the wet nurse to retreat behind Li Sui even more nervously. Li Sui raised his right hand lightly, and the dragon martial army temporarily withdrew their dazzling sword and retreated a bit. When I saw you, it reminded me that there was one thing in my life that was truly a big mistake. Yang Che calmly said, "Oh," as if smiling and waiting for the next words. "Failed to put you to death." Upon hearing Li Sui's light and frivolous sneer, everyone present was soaked in cold sweat, but Yang Che showed no signs of anger. However, he glanced lightly at Han Yuanting, who was wearing the imperial robe next to Li Sui, and his eyes were already filled with murderous intent. In Yang Che's eyes, Li Sui Ben and he both came from the top of the aristocratic family, but now they are raising their humble family and suppressing the aristocratic family, which must be instigated by the Han Yuan court and others from the side. It does look young and handsome, but unfortunately, he is just a scholar who misleads the country. Amon, as long as you are willing to write a decree of abdication for Au, I will respect Au as the supreme emperor, and you will be the holy Empress Dowager of Daliang. Seeing Yang Che's sincerity towards Au in his swaddling clothes, Li Sui sneered and retreated leisurely towards the short wall. "Yang Che, don't say you don't have such kindness. Even if you do, I will never comply with your wishes." Yang Che frowned slightly when he heard the words, and his eyes changed quickly. Someone immediately grabbed the baby emperor from his wet nurse. In her surprise, Li Sui was still as stable as Mount Tai and did not move at all. The next moment, the person holding the swaddle in his arms looked at Yang Che in shock and said, "Your Majesty, you are already out of breath." Upon hearing these words, Yang Che's pupils shrank slightly, and he immediately glanced at the swaddle, lightly sniffing. Indeed, the little person inside had no breath. Li Sui. Amidst the faint smile in front of him, Yang Che gritted his teeth in disbelief and said in a deep voice, "How could you even attack your own bloodline?" Upon hearing this, Li Sui raised his head and smiled as if he had heard some kind of joke, saying, "The imperial family is already ruthless, and now you have the right to say that." After speaking, in the midst of everyone's exclamation, Li Sui lifted his feet and stood on the short wall, his shoe tips already soaring into the air. The night wind suddenly poured into his wide sleeves, making his gorgeous clothes hunt with a sound. Upon seeing this, Yang Che's eyes suddenly trembled, as if he had already sensed something. The Empress Dowager. Ah man. Yang Che, you know, in Li Sui's life, there were mistakes, but there was no room for defeat. After speaking, Li Sui's cold eyes turned to the bright lights at his feet and the quiet buildings in the distance, saying, "I have sent out the Imperial Jade Seal and the Tiger Talisman." At this moment, the Prince of Yuling is already leading troops to the rescue of Prince Qin of Chang'an. Upon hearing these words, the senior officials of the aristocratic family who followed Yang Che were like frightened birds, trembling and unsure of what to do. Even a flickering vibration appeared in Yang Che's eyes. He knew very well that since the death of the late emperor and his return to Chang'an, he had ordered his confidants to secretly monitor the 9 gates of Chang'an. Not to mention the Jade Seal, Tiger Talisman, or even a carrier pigeon, she couldn't fly out of the city. What would happen to her? Looking at Li Sui again at this moment, his eyes were clearly filled with coldness and mockery of successful calculations, with no trace of sadness. Yang Che's heart suddenly became angry, and his eyes were cold and cold. Now he still remembers a month ago, in the spiritual hall parked in the former emperor's palace, when the woman in front of him faced the pain of losing her son, she pretended to be as heartbroken as death, with no hope of life. Now it seems that Yang Che couldn't help but laugh at himself, it was ultimately he who thought of her too well. How could a woman with such a cruel heart be defeated? He used to be full of murders. Now I would rather attract an outsider than compete with him to the death. After careful calculation, I ultimately fell into her trap. In order not to restrain him, he personally poisoned his grandson. In order to prevent himself from being a hostage, let him bear the charge of forcing the palace and killing the Empress Dowager, and give the prince of the Imperial Mausoleum reason to send troops to rescue him. Now he still has to resort to death. Yang Che suddenly gave a relieved smile. Amon is still the same Amon who used to stab his horse with a hairpin on the polo field and take the lead in winning his father's sword as a child. At this moment, looking at the angry yet smiling expression between Yang Che's eyebrows, Li Sui felt an unprecedented sense of contentment and pleasure rising in his chest. Look, he's here. In the midst of the lights, Yang Che saw the woman's smiling profile and followed her gaze. Sure enough, the sound of horse hooves almost echoed through the streets and alleys of Chang'an, rushing towards the inner palace in a neat and orderly manner. It was almost unimaginable that everyone present knew that Zhao Yi, the white-robed general, who was holding a heavy army in guarding the border, was among them. And the border soldiers under his command, who were different from the arrogant soldiers in the capital, now exuded a bloodbath and killing aura, as well as the cold and deafening sound of their iron cavalry, which had already made those present tremble with fear. Almost at the same time, Yang Che suddenly remembered something, reaching out to grab the figure standing on the short wall. But things in the world are like that, never as good as expected. As soon as his fingertips brushed over the gorgeous embroidered phoenix on his dress, the person in front of him jumped down without any hesitation. The wind blew rapidly in his ears, and in the chaos, Li Sui heard the mournful cries on the city wall. That was her good servant, her good jade slave, right. In a blur, Li Sui seemed to see Yang Che half-body protruding from the city wall, and his right hand vigorously reaching out to grab something. Li Sui never expected him to show such a painful expression, but he didn't know if it was because of this defeat, or because of her enemy who had once killed him. Suddenly, the sound of iron hooves approached, and a figure in a plain white robe rushed towards the direction of Li Sui's fall from the panicked army. Li Sui calmly closed his eyes and enjoyed the last moment of indulgence. 13 can weave vegetables, 14 can learn to cut clothes, 15 strings of Kong Ho, 16 recitations of poetry in books, 17 is the wife of a ruler, with constant sorrow and sorrow in her heart. This lifetime, enough, also tired. For the sake of her family, she married Yang Yen who didn't love her. Throughout their lives, they gained immense power and wealth, but she calculated everything and ended up alone in this vast land. Ayu, this is the last thing I can do for you. Only the king of Yuling knew that what she fed to Ayu was not poison, but the western soul fragrance that sealed his breath. If he had no selfish intentions, he would have been ordered to serve as the king of diligence. Tonight, he would still regard Ayu as the emperor and eliminate the rebellious officials of the aristocratic family. If he had selfish intentions, Ayu's life and death would only be in his mind. Once, she thought she was smart all her life, but in the end, fate did not meet her wishes, and she miscalculated. She thought that the Prince of Yuling, Zhao Yi, would untie this Chang'an crisis before Yang Che, but she had calculated through people's hearts in her life, but did not calculate her own ending. Looking up, Li Sui saw the night sky that he had never carefully admired before. It turned out to be so dark blue, so beautiful, just like the brocade that even the most skillful woman in this world could not make. In the twinkling stars, Li Sui's body rapidly fell. Gradually, Li Sui closed his eyes and hummed a nursery rhyme that his mother used to coax her to sleep. If there is an afterlife, she no longer wants to conform to the wishes of others. She wants to find a life that truly belongs to her, not to anyone, but only to Li Sui. For a long time, until the troops of the king of Yuling had advanced, Yang Che still stretched his hand and looked at the person below the city, calm but unwilling to shed a single tear. Why do you always refuse to lose to me? Later, the history of Liang recorded that Zhang Huisheng presented himself as the empress, and he came from the famous Longxi Li family, named Sui, with the courtesy name Amon. She is 7 feet and 2 inches long, with a graceful appearance, standing out from the crowd. At the age of 6, she read the book of history, and at 12, she mastered the book of songs and the analects. Although she is a woman, she is still skilled in archery. 16 married to Emperor Ren, and later established himself in the main palace. During the 12 years of the Linqiao reign, the people of Li were spared from the suffering of war and chaos, and both the ruler and the minister wanted to rest and did nothing. When Emperor Ren passed away, Emperor Hui hung his arches, and Empress Dowager Li called him Ji. If the government does not leave the households, the world will be peaceful. Punishment is rare, and sinners are rare. Farming for the people, and breeding for food and clothing. After the Jianzhang incident, he fell to the city tower and died at the age of 43. Zhao Yi, the prince of Yuling, was appointed in the face of danger to quell the palace rebellion and respect Emperor Wen for his great achievements. Emperor Wen mourned the great death of the Empress Dowager, causing the whole country to mourn and drop out of court for 3 months as a sign of mourning. Later, by the decree of the Empress Dowager, Zhao Yi was appointed as the Grand Commandant and granted the title of Joshi. He was also appointed as the Left Minister of Personnel by the Han Yuan court and concurrently served as the Minister of Personnel. He was granted the title of Duke of Liang. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Zhuang Shengmengdie. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Zhuang Shengmengdie. Outside the window, there was a gust of wind and rain, and the summer rain hit the bamboo leaves with a crackling sound, emitting a hint of coolness. Suddenly, a muffled thunder approached from afar, causing the lattice window to tremble and make a sound. The person sitting on the mother-in-law couch, who was originally resting on a cushion, was startled and let go, knocking into the corner of the desk. "Princess!" A familiar voice rang out clearly in one's ear, and the person in the seat looked up lightly. Seeing the tense appearance of the person in front of them, their spine paused and fell silent. Did the princess hit it? Hurry up and ask the servant to take a look. Nian Nu came forward to investigate while muttering and worrying, but Li Sui remained motionless, just propping up the cushion under him, still in his dream. Princess. Since she stepped out of the cabinet at the age of 16, Nian Nu has long changed her tune, and now it is time to call her Empress Dowager. At the thought of this, Li Sui's mind froze with a bang. She jumped off the several Shanghai city wall, and even if she didn't die, she could be considered devoutly burning the high incense for decades. How could she couldn't help but reach out her hands and place them in front of her. How could they be so fair and flawless, and how short were they? Looking back at her, Nian Nu had been with her since childhood, as old as her, and now she should be dressed as a woman. How could she shrink into the appearance of such a young girl? Li Sui silently scanned her eyes. Although it had been several decades, she still knew that this was the no-bamboo garden where she lived in her aunt's mansion. Feeling the faint pain in his forehead, Li Sui raised his hand to explore, but it made Nian Nu panic. It's all red, how good that is. After speaking, Nian Nu quickly turned his head and called out, Yu Nu, please call for the Imperial physician's order. Yu Nu had just heard the sound as he entered the room, but he could hear the faint voice of the young girl. No need, Nian Nu. When the clear and spiritual voice of the moment he opened his lips fell into his ears, Li Sui once again felt an unprecedented shock. His body trembled slightly, but he suppressed the chaos in his heart and calmly said, lonely. Amidst the waiting gazes of Nian Nu and Yu Nu, Li Sui leisurely took the small cup in his hand, pretended to take a sip of sweet soup to moisten his throat, and just then said, let's bring me a diamond-shaped mirror. Although the words were a bit awkward, Nian Nu thought of his own Princess Su wanting to see where he had just hit. He quickly went to retrieve the auspicious beast double magpie ling flower mirror, and Li Sui slowly reached out to take it. When she saw the stunning and snowy girl in the mirror, her pupils trembled and she tried to suppress her trembling hand. With a loud bang, Li Sui gently pressed the diamond-shaped mirror onto the table, quietly combing through everything. But the more I think about it, the more chaotic it becomes. At this moment, she didn't know whether the past she had jumped off the city tower was Nank Yiming under her window, or whether she had truly gone through that life and died. Now, it's her resurrection from death. Li Sui, who survived the disaster, felt a mixture of emotions, shock, surprise, and even excitement at the moment. It was not because the heavens remembered her past actions that they gave her such blessings. With this in mind, Li Sui gradually relaxed his body and worked hard to calm himself down. Looking back on that life, it was indeed a bit rushed. She had not completely eradicated the power of the intertwined family, she had not raised Yu into a wise ruler, and she had not yet seen a prosperous era of peace and tranquility. All of this was because of Yang Che. Thinking of this, Li Sui's chest couldn't help but ignite an unnamed flame. But on second thought, it was already a thing of the past and could never be changed. Although there was a deviation in her life, she was forced to jump off the city wall by Yang Che, an ignorant old man. However, in the end, he fell into her trap. Moreover, during those 40.3 years, she married Yang Yan, became the crown princess, became the Empress Dowager, and eventually became the regent to become the Empress Dowager. With her alone, she pacified the harem, executed rebellious officials, ensured the well-being of the people, broke the situation of the aristocratic family's domination of the court, and supported a world of development for the poor children. These are also enough to be remembered in history. Compared to the old man Yang Che who conspired to usurp power. But she chased her all the way and fled back to the Luoyang fiefdom from Chang'an. If it weren't for the protection of her kind-hearted husband Yang Yan, who refused to kill, who had already lost his life, how could he return to Chang'an to force the palace? Unfortunately, even after enduring hardships and staying in Luoyang for a lifetime, she finally managed to reach her doorstep and was eventually defeated by her, leaving her in a desperate situation of being caught in a pot. It can be seen that the heavens have eyes. Even if she jumped off the city wall, she still pulled Yang Che, who was on the back. A flaw conceals its beauty. Thinking of this, Li Sui's mood finally improved and he drank the sweet soup in a small cup. Once you come, be content with it. Since the heavens have given her a chance to start over, she will have a better life. With decades of political experience, she will start over again. Even if she will not be like her previous life, she will always have to make progress longer. Princess. Seeing Li Sui's angry and happy expression, Nian Nu nervously glanced at Yu Nu and couldn't help but make a sound. The princess may not have been stunned by the thunder just now. Why don't we quickly invite the Imperial physician's order? As Yu Nu hurriedly descended with a worried expression on his face, Li Sui on the bed was pulled back to his thoughts by the sound, gently stroking his slightly flushed forehead. Guzi also smiled and turned his head, saying, "It's okay, it's just that he recovered from being startled in his dream." What did the princess dream of? Li Sui saw the curious eyes of the nun and picked up the hibiscus cake from the jade plate beside him. A hint of a lingering smile appeared on his lips and he said, "I dreamed of a vicious dog chasing after the hibiscus cake I had in my hands." Later. Upon hearing this, Nian Nu and Yu Nu saw their own princess holding the hibiscus cake in her hand and wandering around for a while. A hint of mockery flashed in her eyes and she said, "I had a sudden idea and threw the hibiscus cake into the foul-smelling ditch. That ungrateful dog was caught off guard for a moment, and its scent also fell into it." Nian Nu and Yu Nu smiled at each other upon hearing the words, and their own princess could still talk and laugh at the moment, indicating that there was really nothing left. After finishing speaking, Li Sui sorted out his thoughts and said to Yu Nu, "Just go and get the Huang ointment." Calling for the imperial physician's order in such a stormy manner is a waste of worry for his aunt and the others. Nian Nu and Yu Nu saw that Li Sui's expression was calm and they knew that their own princess had always given priority to matters. They no longer worried blindly and followed Li Sui's instructions to find the Huang Gao. Watching Yu Nu's receding figure, Li Sui pursed his lips and once again fell into contemplation. In the dream of her past life, she devoted her whole life to serving her country and family, and lived for others. Now that she can still live this life with her golden and jade skin, it is time to live for herself. Li Sui took the exquisite inlaid jade-carved lotus leaf small jade box, gently opened it, picked out a little bit with a small silver spoon, and applied a light layer to the slightly red forehead with the diamond-shaped mirror in the Nian Nu's hand. When he stopped, he placed the small silver spoon at the tip of his nose, still exuding the cold fragrance that was difficult to express. But in this small silver box, which is about the size of a newborn baby's fist, it contains things that are only used by the Tian family. Before the founding of the Chu dynasty, Empress Gao had a deep love affair with Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty, and together they created the world. Therefore, Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty only married Empress Gao in his lifetime. Empress Gao only smiled and sighed at her aging beauty. Emperor Wu of the Ming dynasty gathered famous doctors from all over the world to make incense, and presented this flower ointment to Empress Gao at her Qianqiu banquet with hundreds of flowers, for seasons of rain and dew, and countless precious medicines. It is said that it can make her face delicate, skin like condensed fat, skin fragrant and sweet, youthful and not old. It also has the effects of promoting blood circulation and pain, scar removal and muscle growth, and bone and tendon renewal. When Empress Gao was originally the Empress Dowager, she was conferred the title of Empress Yi and used as Empress Yi ointment. The previous dynasty was destroyed, and this recipe for making ointment has been used by the current emperor of the Zhou dynasty. Now, let alone this ointment, even the recipe for making ointment is in the hands of the Yang family. Or rather, it was in the hands of Yang Chongyuan, her uncle who was born into the Yang family of Hongnong and was appointed as the Grand Commandant and Duke of Zhenghua. Li Sui handed the things in his hand to Yu Nu and heard a sound coming from outside. Princess. Li Sui lowered the legs of Chu on the edge of the couch, gestured lightly, and Nian Nu put away the mirror and set up a soft curtain. I saw only a silver lady in her 20s and 80s, but she continued to wear her old oil green tea floral brocade dress, always looking more composed in her teens. As soon as Fang saluted, Yin Yang exclaimed in surprise, "Why is the princess's forehead turning red?" Upon hearing this, Li Sui stroked his forehead and replied nonchalantly, "Sleeping too fast is shocking. I just applied the Yi Huang ointment and it will be over in a while." Speaking, Li Sui asked someone to give him a seat to watch the tea ceremony and said, "Yin Yang is here, but what's up with Aunt?" Yin Yang took the tea and smiled, then turned to Xiang Nian Nu Er Ren and said, "Princess, you are really asleep. Tomorrow is your 16th birthday, and after tomorrow, you will really be able to leave the cabinet." Upon hearing this, Li Sui's heart sank, but his face remained expressionless. Originally, it turned out to be a return to this year. Madam called for the maidservant to come and see the clothes you need for your birthday. Tomorrow, Your Highness the Empress will personally hold a banquet at the Huaxia Xianhui mansion in the palace. Not only will we, the 5 surnames and 7 hopes, but also high-ranking officials and officials in the capital will come to congratulate you. Even the sages and His Highness will attend the banquet. Don't wait for it to be taken lightly. Madam's intention is to take this opportunity to ask someone to see what our legitimate daughter looks like. Upon hearing Yin Yang's full praise, Li Sui smiled and immediately said, "Okay, Yin Yang will go first, and I will come when I change into clothes." Watching Yin Yang leave with a smile, watching Yu Nu and Nian Nu chatter excitedly, it seemed as if she was really the highly anticipated protagonist at the banquet tomorrow. Unfortunately, it was going to disappoint them. Thinking of this, Li Sui smiled lightly and looked away at the crabapple outside the window, whose petals had been knocked off by the sudden rain, appearing particularly calm. As the two of them changed her clothes, their thoughts had already flown far away. As for Yin Yang, tomorrow's banquet is indeed a gathering of famous generals and scholars, but no one knows what kind of conspiracy and murder hidden in tomorrow's joyful laughter. But she knew what she could do. Today, she is still the daughter of the Li family from Longxi, one of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes, who married the royal family. Her father was Li Zhang, the Grand General of the Zhuge Kingdom, the Minister of the Central Secretariat, and the Duke of Wei. My mother is Princess Qinghe, the daughter of Emperor Gaozong, and the aunt of the current sage, Lady Chen. The queen in the palace is her cousin Yang, and the sage is her cousin Chen Xian. When she was the only one in the court, she entangled the Chen, Yang, and Li clans of the Tian family. If it were the complexity of her background, it would probably be none other than her. Nowadays, it seems that the world is still dominated by the Chen family of the Tian family, but even the children on the streets and alleys know that the emperor in the Mingtang is already a string puppet in the hands of her uncle Yang Chongyuan. The once divine royal family is just living trembling under the eaves of the Yang family, living proudly in the magnificent Daming Palace, and I don't know when they will be mercilessly kicked down. Fortunately, she returned to this year and everything was still in time. She had not married Yang Yan or waded into the deep waters of the Yang family. As long as she did not marry into the Yang family in this lifetime and broke this political alliance, her life would not be constrained by anyone. When Li Sui arrived at his Aunt Li's courtyard, he saw the concubines in the mansion gathered around Li's seat, and several wives and daughters of important officials in the court sitting on either side, chatting and laughing, and accompanied by the young daughter of Lady Cui, who was sitting beside her. At this moment, he was calmly watching her Roman county lord. Seeing Li Sui pull the curtain in, Li Sui smiled and said, "Look at this fragrance, it seems that this Huang ointment is indeed effective. However, in a moment, this forehead looks no different." Li Sui lightly touched his forehead, it was truly a lingering cold fragrance. Amidst the laughter, Li Sui bowed and called Li Sui to sit next to her. She pointed to the dazzling 18 tattered floral skirt on Nan Mashi's side and said, "This is something your elder sister ordered someone to send. It was sewn by Xiaonyang herself in the palace, which is the most popular style nowadays. Go and take a look." Li Sui smiled and walked over under the envious gaze of everyone, touching the high-quality skirt in his hand. Nowadays, it is popular to cut different colors and patterns of clothing into thin and long silk strips, and then arrange them alternately, tightly sewn together with silk like thin gold threads. Originally, the production of such extravagant brocade was extremely wasteful, so only 12 tatters were already something that noble families could enjoy. However, the one in front of her was made of blue, moonlight white, pink purple. 18 colors, which was enough to make her the most dazzling person at tomorrow's banquet. This kind of dress, which even the current princesses of the Tian family do not have, is now given to her as a princess to wear. How could Li Sui not know that this is just a deliberate challenge from the Yang family to the power of the emperor admired by those loyal to the royal family? What does Amon think? Li Sui withdrew his hand and turned to meet Li's shining eyes. With a smile, he stepped forward and grabbed Li's arm, saying, "This kind of good dress. After tomorrow's banquet, I will definitely put it on hold and hide it well." Upon hearing this witty remark, Li Sui smiled slightly and said on Li Sui's forehead, "If you like it, just make 1 or 2 more outfits. If outsiders hear this, wouldn't it be a joke?" Li Sui chuckled at the words and took a sip of the tea handed over by the maid before saying, "Amon wants to have Sister Lao arrange tomorrow's birthday banquet for me. I want to go into the palace and see Sister later. Does Aunt have anything she wants to bring to Sister?" Upon hearing these words, Li Sui smiled and stroked Li Sui's bun, saying, "Coincidentally, a few days ago, Erlang and his father and son went hunting and got a lot of good things. Sanlang shot 2 fire foxes and brought them over. I still have the purple mink skin given by your uncle, so I'll give you and your sister the 2 fire fox skins. You can take them with you later." Upon hearing these words, Li Sui readily agreed and immediately heard a noble woman praise her, saying, "Madam, you are very fortunate. Each of the gentlemen has a literary and military strategy. Now that Sanlang is only 16, he can shoot the cunning fox, which shows that he has excellent arrow and cavalry skills." Her own son was praised, and Li Sui was happy to hear it. Li Sui, who was standing beside her, didn't say much, but heard it in her heart. As the ancient said, the father of the tiger had no sons, and Yang Chongyuan had a life of great talent and military strategy, and his sons were also exceptionally outstanding. In the eyes of others, Yang Sanlang is the former king of Luoyang, Yang Che, and her husband, Yang Yan, both were born by his aunt, Lady Li. Yang Che has outstanding talent and is proficient in Xian Fu. When he first entered the study, he received lectures from famous teachers and was praised frequently. In the face of Yang Chongyuan's questions, he always answered fluently. When he was young, he was even more courteous, treating people with humility, and therefore had an excellent reputation. At this moment, hearing the word Sanlang, Li Sui stopped speaking and only listened from the side. Seeing that the young lady next to her was not speaking and could not talk to them, Li Sui stroked the back of Li Sui's hand and said, "Tomorrow is your birthday, and you should also go to Yuqing Temple to visit your mother. The kindness of being pregnant in October is connected by blood and cannot be forgotten." Upon hearing these words, Li Sui smiled and turned his head, as usual filial and obedient, saying, "I'm definitely going." Li nodded and then taught Li Sui to go. After Li Sui saluted, he took a few steps. Li's heart hovered for a moment, and his eyes changed. Although his face did not show any signs, he finally smiled and spoke out. "Yesterday, Erlang said he got 2 Duan ink stones, which happened to be a birthday gift for you. Did he give them to you?" Others were unaware of her intentions, but Li Sui, who had been with her since childhood, knew every look in her aunt's eyes. However, the desire to speak at this moment stopped, and she understood that her aunt must have wanted her to be a mediator again. Therefore, Li Sui smiled and said, "No, I'm afraid he's heartbroken, but he taught me to go personally." As she spoke, she saw the young lady walking out, and everyone else was laughing from the side. However, Li secretly breathed a sigh of relief and sighed at the young lady's intelligence and understanding. The princess grew up with Erlang, and this childhood friendship is truly enviable. Noticing the optimistic laughter from the ladies around her, Li's lips curved with satisfaction, and she sighed with a hint of pride. "Amon is a good child with a deep understanding, and it's only she who makes Erlang a pair of good friends. In the future, having her accompany Erlang can also help me avoid distractions." Bai Ren. These words fell in the ears of Li Sui, who had gone far away, only feeling a bit harsh. If my aunt knew that in the future, Yang Yan and she would become divorced and suspicious of each other, could she still say these 2 words? In their past lives, people have always regarded her and Yang Yan as a pair of dragons and phoenixes, enviable by Ren, but no one has ever asked them if they have ever loved each other. Just because of this family's marriage alliance, which is highly regarded by the world, she and Yang Yan are like puppets and should be married. Upon hearing this, Li Sui couldn't help but smile, unsure if it was sadness or sighing. Li Sui has been wrong for a lifetime, how can she continue to make mistakes in this life? In this prosperous marriage, regardless of whether others want it or not, she didn't want to get involved in any more. After walking out, Li Sui turned to look at the nearby Nian Nu and said, "Recently, Erlang has gone to my uncle's place." Upon hearing this, the Nian Nu beside him naturally knew that it was Yang Yan. He quietly looked around a few times before cautiously saying, "A few days ago, I don't know how the second Lang Jun learned that the small county lord of Hongnong uncle's family didn't care about Empress Dowager Xiaomen's national funeral, openly went in and out of the Lafang to drink and have fun, and often took a carriage with his singing and dancing skills. The second Lang Jun felt it was inappropriate, so he went to talk to the Tai Wei." Upon hearing these words, Li Sui also understood a bit. Empress Dowager Xiaomen was the biological mother of the current emperor and the late emperor. According to theory, the mother of the emperor passed away, and she should have been mourning for the country for 3 years. Now, she is still in the 3rd year of mourning. However, for the Yang family, these are just empty talk. The Yang family's mansion is far away in Hongnong, and the small county lord has Yang Chongyuan, the second uncle, to rely on. It is unlikely that she is the Empress Dowager, or even the emperor's mourning. I'm afraid she has never taken them seriously. But their Yang family had a filial and benevolent descendant like Yang Yan, which naturally made them looked down upon. However, this matter alone, I'm afraid it won't make my aunt worry, so I specifically asked her to persuade her. Besides that, there's nothing else. Upon hearing Li Sui's question, Nianu pondered and said, I only heard about this matter, and there's nothing else. As he spoke, Nianu seemed to have thought of something and hesitated, saying, but I heard that at that time, Erlang Jun saw that the captain didn't pay attention to it, so he added a few more words, which made the captain angrily reprimand him and leave. Upon hearing this, Li Sui paused and turned around, saying, What did you say? Say. After much effort, Nianu finally blurted out, What do you mean? The sage once said, You have been cruel to me for 3 years. Then he will be free from the embrace of his parents, from the 3-year mourning of his husband, and from the universal mourning of the world. Upon hearing this, Li Sui understood why the father and son were angry. In Yang Yan's desperation, he only saw the debate on filial piety between Confucius and Zhiyu back then. How could he not have imagined that this sentence was full of insinuation towards the Yang family? Although the county magistrate did not observe the national mourning, the Yang family never said anything in their eyes. Confucius said that the prime minister was not benevolent and unwilling to observe filial piety for 3 years. Yang Yan came to this point to discuss, which means that the small county officials who disregarded principles and laws were not benevolent and unfilial, and the Yang family who watched coldly were not benevolent and unfilial. Moreover, her uncle Yang Chongyuan, although inheriting the teachings of Confucius and Mencius, did not like some of the cliché principles. When the emperor declined and the feudal lords rose together, Confucius only regarded the Zhou emperor as orthodox and strongly emphasized the authority of the emperor. The Yang family today is not just like the feudal lords in the past. In the eyes of the loyal old officials of the Zhou dynasty, they are seen as traitors who go against the Zhou ritual, challenge orthodoxy, and have the suspicion of stealing the country. I'm afraid her uncle is not angry with Yang Yan for arguing with him, but for believing that Yang Yan, as the legitimate eldest son of the Yang family, is full of Confucianism and Mencius. Between words, he actually stands on the side of the old imperial officials who are confronting the Yang family. Thinking of this, Li Sui couldn't help but laugh. As a father, his power was overwhelming and he made decisive decisions, while as a son, he was a person of utmost benevolence, filial piety, and purity. It is precisely because of this that when Yang Chongyuan ascended to the throne as emperor, he refused to appoint Yang Yan as the crown prince for a long time. Although Yang Yan was also intelligent from a young age and had both civil and military abilities, in front of many equally excellent brothers, such a benevolent and filial character fell into the eyes of Yang Chongyuan as a woman's kindness. So my aunt was determined to pair her with Yang Yan, just because she, like the Yang family, came from a prestigious family and grew up under my aunt. Although she had devoted herself to her daughter, her personality was not inferior to that of a man, but she had a strong affinity for Yang Chongyuan, her uncle. In the eyes of her aunt and even the entire Li family, she is the best choice to assist Yang Yan, both in terms of emotion and reason. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. The Crime of Huaibi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. The Crime of Huaibi. When Li Sui arrived at the courtyard where Yang Yan was located, he felt that compared to his aunt's dignified and noble Chaolu courtyard, the Longao courtyard in front of him, which was planted with Baiji and Du Roa, could be described as elegant as a gentleman. Although the rain outside the umbrella was sudden and the wind was strong, a faint scent of vanilla could still be smelled in the damp water vapor. Following the fragrant grass along the way, Li Sui walked to a fragrant courtyard, which was Yang Yan's usual resting place. After climbing onto the corridor, he finally shook off the wind and rain. Yu Nu carefully put away his umbrella and followed closely with Nian Nu behind Li Sui. The maidservants outside the door saw it and quickly approached to bow. However, they saw Li Sui touching his lips with his index finger and waving his hand lightly. The maidservants immediately bowed quietly and stood up straight. Li Sui gestured for Yu Nu and the other two to wait outside the door, then picked up their skirts and walked in, bypassing the front hall to the study. Li Sui, who was about to enter towards his right hand, heard Yang Yan's gentle voice ringing inside. This water can't be too much, 9 songs. Li Sui hesitated slightly upon hearing the name, realizing that even now, she still couldn't conceal and touch it. As she walked in as usual, she saw Yang Yanzhang, dressed in a blue round-necked and wide-sleeved robe, holding a pen and standing behind a long table. The woman beside her, who was grinding her sleeves, although not beautiful, was also gentle and charming, reaching her head and eyebrows. The bright moon pearl hanging from her earlobes was gentle. Li Sui was not surprised by the appearance of the 9 songs, as she was the lifelong beloved Shao family of Yang Yan. Originally named Shao Bao, during the reign of Emperor Gaozong, he was also a member of an official family. Later, due to the influence of his clan, he was exiled to the heavenly family, leading to a decline in his family's fortunes. At that time, Shao Bao, who was just a baby, followed his mother to exile to Yuefu. By chance, he was bought into the Taiwei mansion. Due to his clever and gentle appearance, he was pointed out by his aunt to Yang Yan as a maid. The name 9 songs was chosen by Yang Yan, which means playing 9 songs and dancing in youth, chatting about holidays and stealing music. I remember in her past life, she was still the Empress of Yang Yan. She had different opinions with Yang Yan on the assassination of Prince Yang Che of Luoyang, so she was wary of Yang Yan. It was at that time that the disappearing 9 songs appeared and she entered the palace to become the highly favored Empress Shao, warming incense and jade by Yang Yan's pillow every day, engaging in affairs of separation. She never let go of those shallow methods. Unexpectedly, 6 months later, Yang Yan suddenly died in the palace of Empress Shao, and the person who personally fed him poison was actually the Shao family in front of him. During the interrogation, Empress Shao revealed that she was pregnant with a dragon fetus, but the imperial physicians in the entire hospital could not detect any happy pulse. Later, according to palace regulations, she ordered a cane to be interrogated. Unexpectedly, Empress Shao really had 2 lives. At that time, everything was too late. When her son saw her father's bones before they were cold, she, as a mother, killed his concubine with a cane, resulting in 2 lives. Unfortunately, his son inherited her appearance but also inherited the benevolent and kind character of his father Yang Yan. Since he saw the blood of the Shao family, he has been separated from her mother and son, feeling depressed and anxious all day long. 1 year after ascending the throne, he passed away, leaving only Au in his swaddling clothes to become the new emperor. Having lived for half a lifetime, she never expected to end up living like that. Couple separation, mother and son deviation, the court and the public suspected her of jealousy, poisoned the emperor, framed Empress Shao, killed Empress Xiao's mother and son with a cane, and held young grandchildren as manipulators of political power. She had thought about all of these things repeatedly, and after careful consideration, she had a calm and clear result. Everything in the past seems to have originated from the Shao family, and about her, she has uncovered too many mysteries. Why did the Shao family, who served Yang Yan, disappear after she married Yang Yan in her previous life? Where did the years when Shao Shi disappeared go? Why did she suddenly return to Chang'an and Yang Yan's side? Li Sui was well aware that the Shao family deeply loved Yang Yan. She personally poisoned Yang Yan. If it was just to frame trouble for herself, the cost would be too great, fully compensating for the lives of their mother, son, and Yang Yan. All of this was too coincidental, like a game of chess, and it wasn't until the last moment of Zhao's life that she played her crucial role. Li Sui knew that with Zhao's thoughts, it was probably the chess piece in someone else's hand, and the person who held her in their hand had set up this game that lasted for decades since her marriage to Yang Yancheng. In the end, they worked step by step, using an insignificant Shao to make this game happen. Thinking of this, Li Suiquan couldn't help but tightly clench his hands under his wide sleeves. The depth of this person's city was so deep that even she couldn't help but fear it. Now that she has come back to life, she is destined to fight for life and death with this person, never giving up. Only in this way can we avoid the ink being soaked and softened. Old events are vividly remembered, but familiar voices once again ring in my ears. As Yang Yan personally signaled, Li Sui smiled and slowly spoke out, "Erlang is so elegant." Upon hearing the familiar voice, Yang Yan paused lightly and lifted his head to meet Li Sui's smiling eyes, his lips becoming even gentler. "Ah, man is here." Although Yang Yan and Yang Che were older than Li Sui, their relationship was somewhat different because they grew up together with the Li family from a young age. They were the biological sisters born to several other ladies in the mansion and even called the two brothers. However, Li Sui, on the other hand, never did this and only called them Erlang and Sanlang all day long. Even the young Chongyuan couple doted on them and tacitly agreed. "Princess." When Jioga saw the newcomer, she smiled and respectfully bowed. Before Li Sui could even call out, Yang Yan carefully noticed the slight rain on the young lady's body and glanced at the slanting rain outside the window. She couldn't help but say, "What are you doing in such weather?" Yang Yan muttered, then turned to the 9 songs beside him and said, "Boil a bowl of ginger tea for the princess." Jioga smiled and walked away in response. Li Sui lowered his head to look at the slight wetness on his body and walked over to the table without any concern. He picked up the Duan inkstone on the table and rubbed it, saying, "Warm and delicate like a child's skin. Tomorrow is my birthday, and I wanted to come and take a look. Erlang's gift is ready." Seeing Li Sui's fondness for the inkstone, Yang Yan smiled and remained gentle as usual. He poked out Du Heng's handkerchief embroidered with tea-white embroidery from his collar and said, "Last year's birthday, you're just a bowl of noodles to pass the time. Your birthday actually wants to go to the treasure I just got." Feeling Yang Yan wiping the rain from his hair with a handkerchief in front of him, the light touch of Du Ruoxiang still lingered at the tip of his nose. The gentle touch made Li Sui's heart twitch slightly. Facing Yang Yan's serious gaze, Li Sui's heart became even more calm, or rather calm. Yang Yan has always been gentle and kind to everyone, making no mistakes. If it were for the woman next to me, I'm afraid my heart would have already sprouted at this moment. But she knew very well that he was just due to his nature, completely unaware. It is precisely because of this that he became the gentle and affectionate emperor among the people of his past life. Li Sui's mind turned 100 times, and his face remained unchanged with a smile as he said, "It's not because my uncle is biased and only gives you this good thing." Upon hearing Li Sui's words, Yang Yan paused in his hand, and when it was almost time, he withdrew his hand and folded his handkerchief. "It was Auntie who called you again." Feeling the change in Yang Yan's tone, Li Sui put away his smile and looked at the person walking back to the desk. "Even if my aunt doesn't say anything, I will come," he said. "Yes, it would be amazing if you don't come. From childhood to adulthood, my brothers have always received praise from I, but I always make him angry and always ask you to come and make amends." Yang Yan sighed helplessly on his lips, but with a forced smile on his face, he looked at the young girl in front of him. His gaze remained gentle as ever, but Li Sui could see silence and change in it. "I said, I am an unfilial son. I cannot compare with my elder brother, nor can I compare with Sanlang and Sailang, but I am honored to hold the position of this legitimate eldest son." Although the man's words were calm, Li Sui knew how sensitive and soft his heart was under this calmness. He quietly looked at Yang Yan's silent side face, and after so many years of marriage, how could Li Sui not know the familial relationship and estrangement between the father and son? The depth of love and the severity of responsibility, how could your wisdom not understand this truth? However, because of this father-son relationship, you are particularly concerned about these reproachful words and have forgotten them. Li Sui's voice was clear, but his tone remained as calm as ever, not belonging to his age. He slowly walked forward and gently picked up the grinding wheel that Jioga had just studied, pushing it away bit by bit. "You will be like this, and my uncle will also be like this. Even if he has been in the army for half his life and responds to every call, he is just a father in front of you. If you are not the legitimate eldest son of the Yang family, then my uncle will naturally treat you leniently. There is no need to nitpick about everything, but you are not. Although my elder brother is Long, he is not legitimate, and although Sanlang is legitimate, he is not Long. My uncle's expectations for you are different. At this moment, Li Sui had already exhausted all the words his aunt wanted her to comfort him, so he didn't say much. This simple truth was understood by both father and son. However, young Chongyuan had been striving for strength all his life, and how could he reflect on his mistakes to his son? Yang Yan's temperament seemed gentle, but he was stubborn inside, and he was even more adept at using those insincere words. At this moment, the room was silent, but a figure stood by the gauze curtain at the door at an unknown time. After a moment of silence, he did not enter and instead turned to leave. In Yang Yan's pen, there was already a slight touch, and the tip of the pen trembled slightly. After a long time, Li Sui thought that the person in front of him would no longer speak, but suddenly heard a voice slowly say, "Aman, have you ever thought that the royal family will eventually have a sense of gratitude towards us, the Yang and Li families?" Upon hearing this, the crux of the matter was revealed. Yang Yan was benevolent throughout his life, and even after his ultimate death, the court appointed him with a posthumous title like Emperor Zhuang, which was incomparable to her. In such a chaotic world, whether benevolence is good or bad, Li Sui cannot assert it, nor dare he. The Qin family of the Tian family treated the Yang and Li families very well. Since the founding of the Zhou dynasty, they highly valued the Li and Hongnom Yang families, who were the heads of the 5 surnames and 7 hopes. Emperor Gaozong even married Li Sui's mother, his most beloved daughter, to Li Sui's father Li Zhang. On his deathbed, he entrusted his son, whom he had high hopes for, to his uncle Yang Chongyuan. It can be said that it is favored by heaven, but it is not without necessity. But all of this is due to the early establishment of the Zhou dynasty and the instability of the country. It is necessary to win over the Yang and Li families, who have been a century-old family and have made contributions to the founding of the country, in order to win the hearts of the aristocrats and ensure the stability of the world. But all of this began to reverse during the reign of the late emperor. Since his youth, the late emperor has been dissatisfied with Yang Chongyuan, the minister who entrusted him with his family, and has gradually become suspicious of the Yang and Li families. He secretly nurtured the Shengguan clan, who had 4 generations and 3 nobles, gradually stripped the Yang clan of their military power and cut off the Li clan's influence in the court. Spread eyeliner and keep a close eye on all the movements of Yang and Li, just waiting for the strength to be gathered and the net to be closed. If it weren't for the fact that the late emperor fell ill and passed away at an early age, passing on the throne to the younger brother of his mother and fellow countryman on his deathbed, it remains unknown how the current emperor, the Yang and Li clans, are now. Since ancient times, kings and high-ranking officials have always been in this way of mutual restraint. Only when kings control high-ranking officials can they enjoy the world peacefully, and high-ranking officials rely on kings to achieve their aspirations. When the power of important officials gradually increases and becomes difficult to control, they will become powerful officials sleeping on the couch in the eyes of the king, and the killing side will have a stable heart. But if a high-ranking official is weak, how can he not fall into the trap of being cooked to death? It is precisely because of this that the heavenly party led by the Shengguan clan is gradually pressing against the Yang and Li families, and the 2 major families of Yang and Li have long been in opposition to the heavenly family. In this game, there is no right or wrong, it is just everyone's greed for power. The relationship between the ruler and the minister is like a couple who share the same bed but have different dreams, and can only endure hardships together. Who can be said to be unkind? Who is unjust? Prosperity leads to decline, as has always been the case in ancient times. The direction of the trend cannot be controlled by our own efforts, let alone us, who are still in this vortex. How can we extricate ourselves? Do you want to turn against each other? Mutualism. Or send yourself to the other person's edge in order to sacrifice one's life for justice? This sentence was self-evident, as Li Sui did not blurt it out. Upon hearing this, Yang Yan's eyes twitched slightly as he finally lifted his head and turned to look at the person beside him, saying, "Is that why we should serve the people of Dongzhuo and Chengmengdie in this dynasty? Thieves." Facing Yang Yan's shining eyes, Li Sui naturally knew what he wanted to say but never said. Therefore, he put down his pine smoke and ink, fixed his gaze on Yang Yan, and said with a stern expression, "The world is changing rapidly. Now, not only have we chosen this situation, but also the current situation has chosen us." Feeling the subtle changes in Yang Yan's eyes, Li Sui couldn't help but sigh and said the last sentence lightly and slowly. "What we need to do and what we can do now is to protect the people around us. If we don't seek something black or white like this, it will only be self-seeking." Li Sui did not continue, but the meaning between them was already understood. Yang Yan wants to find a way to balance and coexist in this fierce battle, which is too naive. At this moment, the room was silent, and only the rustling sound of the sudden rain outside the window could be heard. After an unknown amount of time, it was already time to hear the footsteps of someone approaching the outside. Yang Yan suddenly smiled, but with a hint of inexplicable estrangement. "Yes, this is Ah Man, more like the Ah Man of our descendants of the Yang family." Upon hearing this self-deprecating voice, Li Sui couldn't understand the meaning behind it. Looking up, Jade in a crimson dress walked in and respectfully offered ginger tea. "Princess, hurry up and take it. If you get caught in the cold wind, what's good for tomorrow's banquet? The ginger tea is cooked and I'll air it again. It's just right for you to enjoy." The woman's words are gentle and her thoughts are delicate, like Yang Yan who was very close, but she is completely different from her Li Sui. Ultimately, Xiao and Yang Yankai are people on the same path. "No wonder you're so considerate, even your aunt praises you." Li Sui took the ginger tea and smiled lightly. His eyebrows and eyes curved like the bright moon, and his once stunning appearance made the 9 songs beside him lose their focus in an instant. "I still have to go to the palace to visit Sister A, so I won't bother." Li Sui drank the ginger tea in one gulp, handed it back to Jade, dipped a silk handkerchief in the corner of his mouth, and then turned around. "Lang Jun, what's going on, princess?" Jade felt the strangeness of the atmosphere, holding an empty bowl and turning to look at Yang Yan. However, she saw that although Yang Yan was holding onto his pen at the moment, he was just stunned, watching a drop of condensed ink on the tip of his pen about to fall onto the paper, and quickly made a sound. Upon hearing the sound, Yang Yan moved, but it was already too late. The condensed ink fell and a beautiful character was destroyed. Instead, Yang Yan hurriedly put down his pen and moved the piece of paper away. However, the black ink had already soaked the back of the paper and was printed on the unfinished painting below. Although the ink falls on the woman's eyebrows and eyes, it can be vaguely seen that the person in this painting has a somewhat familiar appearance. Seeing this, Jade hurriedly stepped forward and placed the tray beside the table. Seeing the painting that had already been painted, she couldn't help but look at the person in front of her with heartache, unable to conceal her guilt in her words. "It's my servant's carelessness. Not related to you." Almost at the same time, Yang Yanyu spoke softly, with no expression in his eyes. He paused for a moment, but then surprisingly reached out his hand and threw the painting out. "Lang Jun." Jade saw this and was about to intervene, but she heard Yang Yan speak out. "Well, since it's destroyed, why keep it for now?" The man's voice was calm, but it was clear with a hint of complex melancholy. Li Sui walked slowly as he walked out of the Longao courtyard, with Yu Nu holding an umbrella for him. Watching the drizzle outside the umbrella, he couldn't help but think of his lost and confused life. After arguing with Yang Yan for a long time, some words had not yet been spoken. "At the moment when I married his mother and Emperor Gaozong entrusted the late emperor to Yang Chongyuan, the Yang and Li families were already at their prime, not only having the power to assist in politics, but also being relatives of the imperial family. If the future emperor was born by the eldest sister, the future emperor would still shed the blood of the Yang family. Such power and favor have already made many people afraid and unhappy. Pifu is innocent and harbors a guilty conscience. The Shengguan clan rose up to contain the Yang and Li clans, and became mortal enemies with the Yang and Li clans since they were favored by the late emperor. But now Emperor Yuancheng has a cowardly nature and is completely powerless to use chess pieces like the previous emperor to coerce the Yang and Li families. On the contrary, the Shengguan family used the name of supporting the emperor to win over old officials and prepare to kill the Yang and Li families at any time. The Yang and Li families, along with the emperor, were destined to engage in not only power struggles but also life struggles. If you don't enter, you will die. In the eyes of others, she follows the surname of the Li family. Even if she has half of the royal bloodline, in the eyes of others, she is just a Li family member who shares the same spirit as the Yang family and has the suspicion of usurping power and politics. These were clearly seen in the eyes of those royal descendants who were either indifferent, disgusted, cautious, or flattering when she went to the palace for family banquets as a child. Under this standoff, if the Yang and Li families bravely retreat from the current, can they spare their lives? I'm afraid it's a luxury for her to seek a whole body. Thinking of this, Li Sui couldn't help but want to laugh, whether it was because of Yang Yan's innocence or his own heartlessness. She doesn't have that kind of love, all she can do is to live the life she wants, protect her father and mother, and ensure that the people around her have a safe life. That's already good. She will not forget that in her past life, it was because Yang Yan had an unquestionable innocence towards Yang Che, a brother of the same mother, that she fell from the city tower to protect the country. Sometimes even benevolence and kindness can turn into a deadly sword. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Mixed Happiness and Sorrow. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Mixed happiness and sorrow. As the carriage slowly drove into the Daming Palace, the rain had already started to drizzle. It was not until the inner palace that Li Sui got off the carriage. Exquisite embroidered shoes adorned with pearls and jade were stepping on the damp floor tiles. Looking up, there was a familiar place. The same city tower, the same palace wall. Only the emperor sitting on the Mingtang was different, and things were different. Looking at the battlements on the Xuanwu Gate, Li Sui recalled the moment he jumped down from there. It turned out that the tower was so high, and he couldn't remember whether it hurt or not at the moment it fell. Perhaps even if she died, those old ministers just wanted to applaud and cheer. Li Sui smiled lightly on his lips, then glanced back and slowly withdrew his calm gaze, turning towards the legislative yuan. Although it was a rainy and gloomy day, the legislative hall where the empress resided did not diminish its prestige and prestige. When Li Suifang walked up to the jade steps outside Empress Yang's sleeping room, Empress Yang's confidant, Shangong Jema, welcomed him and smiled as he bowed. Princess. Li Sui nodded and smiled, then lifted Jema and said, "What is sister doing?" Jema stood up and welcomed Li Sui inside, saying, "Your Highness has been feeling a bit lazy and uncomfortable these days. He has invited the Imperial physician to come and have a look. He is currently diagnosing his pulse." Upon hearing this, Li Sui's heart trembled slightly and he could not guess anything. Before speaking much, he had just arrived at the back hall and indeed heard the joyful congratulatory sounds of the palace people coming from inside. "Congratulations, Your Highness, congratulations, Your Highness." At this moment, Li Sui and Jia Mo glanced at each other, still unable to understand the meaning behind it. A smile still hung on Li Sui's lips, but his heart was slowly sinking. Everything is really like a lantern, shining on her dream of Nankyimeng. The world is celebrating the arrival of this child, but she knows the fate of this child and the calamity he will bring. This feeling corresponds to that sentence. Everyone is drunk, I wake up alone. But how could she, as a awake person, watch as sister's heart wrenches in the future? With this in mind, Li Sui gradually tightened his hand under his sleeve. "Ah man." Hearing the familiar and gentle voice of the woman gradually enter my ears, I turned my eyes and saw her faint figure through the lifted veil, but it seemed like I was in a dream. Li Sui couldn't help but want to shed tears. At the moment when she was alone supporting the Yang family, fighting against the world, and truly becoming a lonely family, this soft and familiar voice echoed in her ears many times, but it was unattainable. It had been a long time since she heard Jia call her, and Li Sui couldn't remember. She only remembers that after losing her child in her previous life, Jia changed, losing her noble demeanor and the glory of the eldest daughter of the Yang family. She became a mother who was constantly in tears, worried about gains and losses, and almost behaved abnormally. In the end, she couldn't bear such torture and ended up tying herself with a white silk. Even though it seemed like a distant world, that scene still fell clearly in front of Li Sui. With a plain face facing the sky and not stained with dust, Jia, wearing only a plain white dress, swayed and hung on the high beam, like a gust of wind, disappearing from the Daming Palace. At that moment, she realized that Jia had become so haggard that she would turn into a handful of red skin and bones in such a decisive way. In the second month after Jia's departure, Emperor Yuanqing suffered from hysteria and passed away suddenly at the end of the year. Because the emperor had not yet ascended to the throne when he passed away, and there were no heirs under his knees, loyal old officials of the Zhou family strongly worshipped the nephew of Emperor Yuanqing to ascend to the throne. Nevertheless, young Chongyuan remained in charge of the court. After only 3 months of ascending the throne, the new emperor was forced to write an abdication letter, giving way to Xian and Yang Chongyuan, and was ordered by heaven. He ascended to the throne and designated the country as Liang, becoming Emperor Wu of the new dynasty. Just now they said you entered the palace, and I was still thinking about what to do if you're not afraid to wet your clothes or cool down on such a rainy day. Who knew you could share such good news with me as soon as you arrived? Empress Yang's soft voice and gentle smile on the seat, dressed in a floral skirt with a floral design, seemed elegant and without any embellishments from a distance. Only by paying close attention can one see the clusters of delicate wood hibiscus embroidered with fine gold thread. When we arrived, the rain had already eased a lot. Facing Empress Yang's gentle and watery eyes, when she reached out to call out to her, Li Sui's softest part of her heart was moved, so she stopped being polite. She smiled and spoke as she naturally walked over, grabbed Empress Yang's warm hand, sat down, and naturally rested her head on Empress Yang's legs, feeling a sense of peace and relaxation that had never been felt in a long time. Thinking about my birthday tomorrow and having my eldest sister personally hold a banquet for me at the Huaxia Xianghui building, how can I not come and thank my elder sister for her heart? Between you and my sisters, did you ever need to say these words? Empress Yang finished speaking with a smile and looked at the young lady, who was soft and delicate in her arms. Her beautiful and long hair spread out on her lap, and she couldn't help but reach out and gently touch it. Her radiant fingertips gently wrapped the fallen hair behind the young lady's ear, and then she smiled gently. She then turned to the imperial physician below, Sun Zhong, and said, "My child in my belly has been taken care of by the imperial physician." Upon hearing this, Li Sui caught a glimpse of the person standing below, still leaning against Empress Yang's embrace. However, he unconsciously gazed at the old minister with slightly white temples under Feng's carriage and earnestly arched his hand, saying, "I will do my best." At the signal of Empress Yang, Jia Mo personally presented the imperial physician with a red seal and immediately sent the person out. "The princess likes cheese cherries, go and serve her a cup." Upon hearing Empress Yang's command, Li Sui saw the nearby palace maid respond and slowly lift her head. With her right hand, she cautiously touched Sister A's inconspicuous lower abdomen and said, "If Auntie and the others had found out, how happy they would have been." Upon hearing these words, Empress Yang's lips warmed even more. "I hope this child can have a safe and smooth life, and someone will call me Aunt in the future." Empress Yang chuckled and pulled Li Sui to sit down beside her. At this moment, the palace maid walked up with a cheese cherry and respectfully handed it to the table next to Li Sui. Empress Yang turned to this and said, "You love this the most. In the long future, tasting this taste will change." Li Sui picked up the cups and found that the red cherry blossoms, which had been removed from the pit, were plump and plump. He poured a layer of sweet and rich cheese on the surface, wrapped it in a layer of sugarcane syrup, and took a bite into his mouth. Suddenly, it was cool and refreshing. The sour and sweet taste of the red cherry blossoms, combined with the sweetness of cheese and sugarcane syrup, was delicious but not greasy. It's best to eat this in summer. Do you want it, sister? Since childhood, the sisters have often shared food. Seeing the little lady raising her cup and spoon, Empress Yang smiled and took a sip without hesitation. Yun Yang. A voice of overjoyment accompanied by eager footsteps came. Upon hearing the sound, Chen Xian, the Emperor Cheng of Yuan, dressed in his usual attire, walked in and saw Li Sui greeting him affectionately. "Ah, man is also here." Li Sui stood up and made the next salute. Emperor Yuan Cheng, who had already stepped forward, only said, "Get up quickly." He personally pressed down on Empress Yang's body, excitedly supporting her shoulder and saying, "Sit down quickly." Empress Yang pursed her lips and smiled, her lips filled with the happiness of being a wife. "Ah, man came here today coincidentally." Upon hearing Emperor Yuan Cheng talking to him, Li Sui lifted his head and smiled, "My cousin wants to give me a good start." Emperor Yuan Cheng spoke in unison, his eyebrows and eyes full of joy as if he had just become a father today. "I heard from the imperial physician that this pregnancy." Seeing the sudden worry in Emperor Yuan Cheng's words, Empress Yang comforted her by placing her hand on the back of her hand and shook her head with a smile, saying, "The imperial physician's order says that this pregnancy only has some signs of congenital deficiency, and it is easy to adjust it appropriately without any major harm." Seeing the lingering concern in Emperor Yuan Cheng's eyes, Li Sui furrowed his brows lightly. However, Empress Yang spoke out to comfort him, "Don't worry, the imperial physician is the holy hand of the imperial physician's office. With his medical skills, he will surely ensure the safety and smoothness of this child. These days, I will also try my best to eat more and never starve him." Seeing Empress Yang's comforting words, Emperor Yuan Cheng reluctantly let go and tightly grasped her hand. Instead, he continued to nag and instruct the people in the legislative palace to serve her well, as if he had not said a word and the palace people would not be able to serve her well. Until he finished speaking, Emperor Cheng of Yuan finally looked at Empress Yang and said, "Since the imperial physician ordered you to rest and recuperate, then you can live and support yourself. Those trivial official duties will be temporarily handed over to Lady Shu and Shangguanjiaoyi. If there is any major matter, they will report it to you and make a decision. It's good for you." Upon hearing Emperor Yuan Cheng's arrangement, Empress Yang naturally agreed. Seeing Empress Yang's somewhat tired expression, Emperor Yuan Cheng carefully helped Empress Yang lean against the pillow, which reminded him of Li Sui beside her. "Your sisters have had a good relationship since childhood. These days, Amon also takes more time to go to the palace to accompany your sister." Li Sui smiled and nodded, "Don't worry, cousin. Even if you don't tell me, I will often go to the palace." Emperor Yuancheng smiled and looked at the young lady in front of him, saying, "That's good." As he spoke, Emperor Yuancheng seemed to suddenly remember something. He smiled and looked at Empress Yang, then turned to Li Sui beside him and asked, "Do you think this pair of nephews are destined? Today you have good news, and tomorrow is her birthday again. It seems that our child is eager to attend Auntie Man's birthday banquet tomorrow." Empress Yang smiled knowingly, but Li Sui sat beside her and whispered, "I heard that there will be many people attending the birthday banquet at the Wakalik Xianhui Tower tomorrow. Now that Sister A is feeling unwell, it may affect her ability to conceive. Why don't Sister A stay in the palace and rest? I have Carmo and her attendants by my side, why are they so delicate?" Upon hearing these words, Empress Yang shook her head. However, Emperor Yuancheng beside her thought of something. He placed his right hand on Empress Yang's lower abdomen and turned to look at the young lady beside her. He made a decision and said, "Amon is right. Since the child has some shortcomings, he should be cautious. Tomorrow, you will have an abortion in the palace. I will congratulate Amon's birthday on your behalf. In response to the persuasion in the eyes of Emperor Yuancheng, Empress Yang refused, but couldn't resist their repeated persuasion and finally agreed. When Li Sui left the legislative hall, Emperor Yuancheng still accompanied Empress Yang. Everything was so warm and touching. The rain outside had already stopped, and Li Sui was walking in the corridor. 2 swallows fluttered under the tiled eaves, flying towards the distance and merging into a gradually fading black spot on the dense dark sky. Embroidered shoes made a faint sound as they stepped on the waterlogged tiles, but Li Sui gradually fell into contemplation. At the moment when Jie's child was born, carrying the expectations of her parents and the whole country, she became the first person in this dynasty to be appointed as the crown prince at birth. However, when everyone joyfully arranged the crown prince's full moon ceremony, the child, due to congenital deficiencies, was extremely weak and could not withstand the wind. Before reaching full moon, she suddenly passed away. Li Sui will never forget the heart-wrenching cries of Sister A day and night. I will never forget her desperate fate, now that my past life has passed, but in her heart, the death of that child has become a crux. In this life, she must guard that child for her sister. We cannot let sister embark on such a decisive path again. Seeing it delivered to the entrance of the inner palace, Li Sui got on the carriage with the help of Jia Mo. However, just as Jia Mo was about to turn around and go back, the carriage and horses stopped leisurely. Nianu smiled and walked over, saying, "The princess said she almost forgot." When she arrived, the Grand Commandant's wife asked the princess to bring the fox skins of the 3 generals to present to His Highness. The princess ordered the maidservants to go to the front of the palace to retrieve them. Jiama has always had a delicate heart, and he should have understood that Li Sui had something to remind him of. Therefore, he quietly ordered the palace maid accompanying him to wait and follow him alone onto the carriage. Princess. At the moment when the car curtain fell, Li Sui didn't say much. He gestured to Yunu, who was serving beside him, to hand over the fox skin to Jia Mo. He then said, "Sister, your health is struggling now. I need you to take good care of me these days." Upon hearing this, Jiama was about to bow down and humbly answer, but his arms were firmly held by both hands. Looking up, Li Sui slowly said, "I know that Shangong has been with Sister A for a long time, and Sister A has never treated Shangong differently from others. Today, I want to sincerely ask for Sister A, for the child in Sister A's womb." At this point, Li Sui's gaze shone like a star under the candlelight, and his voice gradually became low and clear. "In the heart of Shangong, are you from Sister A or the Yang family?" Upon hearing these words, Jia Mo looked up in amazement, facing Li Sui with calm and clear eyes. His heart trembled, and he suddenly understood the woman's intentions in front of him. He immediately restrained his expression, knelt down upright, without any anxiety or fear, and bowed with only his hands. His face, which had always been so displeased with his appearance, showed an unprecedented seriousness and firmness. "I have been selected by the Grand Commandant's wife to serve the Empress, and have been with her since the age of 10. I am 3 years older than her. In the past 15 years, I have been accompanying her. Your Highness regards me as my servant's relative, sister." Speaking of this, Gamo's face was filled with sincerity and emotion. "I was presumptuous of you, but your Highness, as a pure and gentle person, treats us like relatives. No matter what others may think, Gamo has been His Highness's loyal servant from beginning to end. Now that His Highness is pregnant, Gamo only sees His Highness and His Highness, and no one else." After speaking, Jia Mo bent down and bowed down, touching the ground with his forehead and cutting off the railway. If Jia Mo goes against today's words in the future, he will not end well. Looking at the woman in front of him, Li Sui trusted her. In his past life, Sister A had left, and Jia Mo followed the coffin to Zhaoling. When Sister A's coffin was placed, Jia did not hesitate to touch the pillar and die without anyone responding. Emperor Yuanqing was grateful for Jiama's loyalty and posthumously honored her as a loyal and righteous princess. She was buried in the Zhaoling mausoleum, fulfilling her vow to follow her to the death. "Sister, don't blame me." Li Sui personally bent down to hold up Gamo's arms, and as he looked at her, Gamo saw that the woman in front of him rarely showed the softness and gentleness that only Empress Yang had. "Now there's something that only Shanggong can do for Sister A and me." As he spoke, Li Sui leaned over to Gamer and gradually said solemnly, "The Imperial physician is an important person to ensure the peace and security of Sister A's birth. I hope you will pay attention to her." Upon hearing the sound, Jia pondered and felt Li Sui gradually retreating, followed by a light and ethereal sentence falling into the carriage. "Nianu, send Gamo away." As the carriage gradually drifted away from behind, Gamo walked towards the road he had come from, recalling the conversation he had just had. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy it became, and he became more convinced of Li Sui's implied meaning. The princess wanted her to personally figure out a way to keep an eye on the imperial physician's order. This was not only something she had to do quietly, but even the emperor, the young family members who were connected by blood, such as the captain and the captain's wife, were not allowed to know anything about it. When Gamo came up with this intention and connected it to the current situation, he couldn't help but sweat a cold sweat and feel a chill seeping out of his heart. She knew that the princess and the queen had been dependent since childhood. Although they were not the sisters of a mother's compatriots, they were already as close as blood. She believed that since the princess had asked her to act like this, it must be for the benefit of the queen, that would be enough. This carriage is still slowly moving forward. Li Sui calmly leaned against the car wall, closing his eyes and pondering. Just now, she saw the surprise and shock in Gamo's eyes, and even she was shocked by her unspoken suspicions. But at the moment she walked out of the legislative yuan, the various memories of her past life lingered in her mind, but gradually condensed into a result that made her unable to calm down. At that moment, she seemed to suddenly come up with something. Li Sui couldn't be certain that her suspicions were the truth, but she knew that following the situation in her past life, the crown prince died young, Sister A committed suicide, Emperor Yuanqing couldn't bear the pain of losing his wife and son, and suffered from hysteria and depression. All the tragedies came with young Chongyuan ascending to the throne and dominating the world. All of this is too coincidental. In both emotions and hearts, she doesn't want her suspicions to come true. That child, after all, is the bloodline of the Yang family and the grandson of Yang Chongyuan. Are there still fewer cases of killing fathers and children in the imperial family? Li Sui, who had died once, knew that in this power struggle, her family relationship was extremely fragile. She could not be as naive as Yang Yan, exchanging ridiculous trust, lack of defense, for endless betrayal. What she wants is to be foolproof, to be safe and smooth for those who love her beside her. She knew the medical skills of Sun Zhong, who was ordered by the imperial physician. If the death of the crown prince was really a matter of fate, it would be fine. However, if it were really human-made, based on Sun Zhong's experience of studying under the medical sage Hu Yuan, how could he not have noticed it at all? And how many people can make him remain silent and dare not reveal during that time? With this in mind, Li Sui is now more worried about how a gentle person like Sister A can withstand such a blow if all of this becomes true. You knew. On the side, Yunufang turned his head and before he could respond, he saw the little lady in front of her suddenly open her eyes, her bright and sparkling eyes silently staring at her, and her low and light words entered her ear. "Find someone for me." End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Jade Qing worships mother. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Jade Qing worships mother. The next day, under several days of continuous rainy weather, it was a rare and beautiful day. At about 3/4 of an hour, the Grand Commandant's mansion was already sweeping with joy, hanging silk and lanterns. In the clear summer sky, the morning sunlight emitted a dazzling golden light, falling on the green bamboo in the courtyard, creating a verdant atmosphere. When Li Sui went to pay his respects to Yang Chongyuan and his wife, he rode a carriage with his father Li Zhuang to the royal Yuqing temple. After the morning rain, Yuqing temple carries a light spirit that is not found in the mortal world. From afar at the foot of the mountain, one can hear the lingering sound of bells and chimes on the mountaintop. As the carriage spiraled up the path and stopped under the steps of Yuqing temple, the gentle voice of my father could be heard in my ears. "Ah man!" Nianu quickly opened the car curtain and got out of the car, helping Li Sui out with Yunu inside. In the lush green forest, the crisp chirping of birds could be heard endlessly. Li Sui and Li Zhuang climbed up the stairs, paying homage to the true human treasures in each hall, and then walked along the path towards a more secluded courtyard. When they arrived at the place, they saw a hidden guard with a knife around the yard, respectfully bowing to the two of them. Aichuan, dressed in a blue and plain robe, was waiting in the corridor. As soon as he saw someone coming, he greeted them with a smile. "Lord Guogong, Princess." Li Sui stepped forward to support Hua Chun's body and lifted him up, his tone very approachable. "Spring Yang, get up quickly." Hua Chun nodded and stood up, then said, "Yu Zhenxian is currently doing morning talk. It's almost done. Please ask the Duke and Princess to wait in the side room." "It's okay, this view is peaceful, we can just wait in this courtyard." Upon hearing Li Sui's words, Hua Chun agreed and immediately tidied up a stone table and stool under a wisteria flower stand in the courtyard. After the father and daughter sat down, he brought 2 cups of clear tea. This was picked from the tea trees in the back mountain, and used the snow water accumulated under the flower roots last year. Although it was simple, it was all done by the immortal master himself. After listening to Hua Chun's words, Li Suiqian took a sip. Although the tea flavor was not as delicate as those precious products, it had a non-smoking atmosphere. "Yuzhen immortal master, it's okay." In silence, his father's voice rang out. Li Sui turned his head and saw Li Zhuang holding the teacup in his hand. The seemingly calm inquiry made her hear the indescribable deep-seated longing. "In my childhood memories, my father and mother were once in harmony, and the years were peaceful. At that time, her mother would always hold her and wait under the wisteria flower stand that her father must pass by, reciting poetry and singing nursery rhymes for her. Whenever her father appeared in the corridor, a smile even more beautiful than flowers would appear in her mother's eyes. And what she waited for was not only her father, but also her favorite candy cake." Looking back now, Li Sui felt that his mother at that time was not a noble and glorious princess in front of his father, but a child, a spoiled and spoiled child. Nowadays, those warm scenes are still in front of us, but those emotions no longer exist. It can be seen that no matter how beautiful the love is, no matter how sincere the feelings are, after the death of the previous emperor, the Yang and Li families no longer have the audacity to monopolize power, step by step deceiving the emperor and treating the emperor as a puppet. They have already begun to shatter and turn into dust. So, when she was 7 years old, her mother resolutely chose to leave, abandoning her princess identity, and willingly became the Jade Immortal Master who recites scriptures and eats fast today. Immortal Master is still like before, doing morning and evening homework every day, taking care of these flowers and plants on weekdays, occasionally playing chess alone, or going to the back mountain. After saying a few words, Hua Chunfang heard the door behind him open with a squeak sound. The 3 people in the courtyard all heard the sound and looked, only to see a cold and beautiful woman wearing a dark green Taoist robe with wooden hairpins tied around her hair standing behind the door, still shining brightly with her beautiful eyes, but without that vivid smile. However, as he calmly scanned towards the courtyard, when he touched Li Zhang's slightly trembling eyes, he just calmly passed by like a flying swan and turned inside, leaving only the thin and cold figure behind. "Princess, please." Upon hearing the voice of Hua Chun, Li Sui looked at his father beside him and saw him lower his eyes. He finally put down the teacup he was holding in his hand and calmly said, "You go." Li Sui gave his father a deep glance without saying much, then turned around and walked into the room under the guidance of Hua Chun. The door behind me was once again closed, and everything in front of me remained unchanged. It was simple, but it could bring a sense of tranquility. After a lifetime, now that Li Sui could look at his mother kneeling behind her, looking at her tenderly, he felt an almost uncontrollable excitement and sourness in his heart. His eyes were slightly hot, and he was almost about to shed tears. He saw her tidy up her clothes with bare hands, kneel respectfully, lightly touch her head to the ground, and bow. However, a drop of tears silently fell on the mirror like floor tile. At this moment, my mother doesn't know that they haven't seen each other for many years. Auntie. Upon hearing the almost imperceptible choking in the girl's voice, Chen, who was kneeling there, felt a chill in her heart. She couldn't help but start from the side and silently closed her eyes, forcefully holding on to the surging emotions in her chest. It took her a long time to turn back and try to pull a smile, then softly say, "Get up." When the little lady stood up straight, she gently tapped the soft cushion beside her. "Come on." Li Sui walked forward obediently and knelt beside Chen Shi, twisting his skirt. Chen's gaze was soft and delicate as she scrutinized the girl's appearance. After a long time, she finally lifted her hand, which was holding the sandalwood fragrance beads, and gently caressed the girl's face. "Alman has grown up again." After finishing her words, Chen's lips still held a smile, and she immediately poked out a small red bag and said, "I don't have anything else here. Every year, I can only give you a talisman to ensure your safety and success." Li Sui took the item and knew that this seemingly small object must have been personally painted by the mother, Yuqingzhenren, in front of the shrine for daily prayer. Li Sui put the talisman in his sleeve and respectfully bowed. "Today should be a man thanking my mother for nurturing me." Upon hearing these words, Chen smiled lightly on her lips as she looked at the smiling face of a girl just like herself. She gently stroked the girl's bun and murmured softly, "I don't expect anything else, I just hope you're safe." Chen's words didn't go on, but Li Sui didn't know what they meant. Looking at his mother's forced smile, his heart felt muffled and he didn't know how to respond. "I also hope that Auntie treasures her jade body. Alright, let's go back. Today is your good day, everyone is waiting for you." When Li Sui put down his hands, he lifted his head and wanted to deeply engrave the appearance of the person in front of him in his heart. Every year on her birthday, she comes to Yuqing Temple to kneel and worship. Looking at her mother's gentle eyebrows and eyes, she can't help but develop a greedy heart. No one knows how many times she wants to invite her mother back to Chang'an City. Even if she wants to spend another birthday with her, she knows that even if she asks, she can only get a rejection. So from her past life until her mother's death, she never spent a day of family happiness with her mother. "Take care, Auntie." After a deep bow, Li Sui walked out of the room and saw his father still sitting under the flower rack. Although there was a painting of spring standing beside him, he looked so lonely and lonely. In recent years, compared to the Taiwei mansion, which has many wives and concubines, my father's mansion can also be considered isolated. It is well known that his father, Li Zhonggui, was the son of the Li family in Longxi. He now holds great power with Yang Chongyuan, and although he is known as the Qinghe son.in.law, his mother was born and entered the Imperial examination. The two of them have long been separated from him. Now that his mother has been away for 9 years, even if his father cannot marry the main wife again, it is reasonable for him to marry several concubines and concubines. Only Li Sui knew that his father never married again throughout his life. In front of my mother, my father is a ruthless person. In front of the world, my father is a passionate person. Let's go. Father's voice rang in his ear, and Li Sui nodded before delivering a few words to Hua Chun and walking out. After leaving Yuqing Temple, the sound of bells and chimes still swirled in the distance, climbing down the stairs. Li Sui Gang was about to get on the carriage with his help, but he vaguely saw a familiar figure. She slightly retreated a bit and looked at the guard behind the carriage through the wall. "I'm on." Father's voice rang in his ears, and Li Sui quickly glanced at him before finally retracting his gaze and getting on the carriage. After walking out for a long time, Li Sui still leaned against the pillow, frowning slightly, forgetting the Nian Nu and Yu Nu who were serving beside her. However, the figure gradually became clear in her mind and condensed into a person. King Yuling, Zhao Yi. Returning to the mansion, it was already noon and Li Sui was served with a meal, only taking a short nap. He was awakened and prepared for the palace banquet. Under the embrace of maidservants, I bathed and dressed, tied up a hanging bun, embellished with small and exquisite pearls, and then changed into that 18 tattered floral skirt, giving it a more luxurious look. The goose-yellow flower pearl on my eyebrows added a touch of girlish charm. While Li Sui was holding the mirror and taking a selfie, he heard Nian Nu approaching with a smile and bowing, "Princess, the third prince has arrived. He is waiting for you by the bamboo forest outside the house." The girl in the mirror's eyes twitched slightly, reached out to trim the pearl flower next to her haircut, then stood up and walked towards the outside. Now in early June, the midday sun also has a hint of warmth, and through that lush bamboo forest, mottled shadows are cast by the bamboo leaves. The man was wearing a bamboo blue round-necked narrow-sleeved cloud-patterned brocade robe, standing behind the bamboo forest with his hands down, as if sensing the footsteps of Li Sui approaching. Yang Che's sighing voice echoed from the forest. "I thought neither you nor I had changed, but seeing the scratches on the bamboo branch, I realized that we had grown quite a bit taller." After speaking, Yang Che turned his head. Unlike Yang Yan's warm and gentle smile, Yang Che's smile was more like sunshine, dazzling and free-spirited. Having seen the deep-eyed and seasoned king of Luoyang above the city wall, Li Sui felt a sense of seclusion as he looked at Yang Che in front of him. Thinking of that palace upheaval, I'm afraid Yang Che wouldn't have guessed it from her past life until her death. She would take advantage of the opportunity for her son to mourn and enter the imperial tomb, and under his watchful eye, deliver the jade seal and tiger talisman with the Zigong palace to the hands of the prince of the imperial tombs far away from the border. Now recalling Yang Che's angry and despondent appearance, it seemed to overlap with the young man in front of him. Li Sui couldn't help but feel disappointed. With Yang Che's gaze just now, he saw one scratch after another on the green bamboo branch beside him. At the age of 7, she became melancholic and unhappy due to her mother's resolute departure. She didn't like to talk to people, and in the entire mansion, except for her father, she was also a servant. Every day, she could only temporarily forget the sadness of losing her mother when her father accompanied her in the next court. Later, her aunt sympathized with her and discussed with her father, allowing her to be admitted to the Taiwei mansion and spend time with several older siblings, so as not to be alone. On the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival that year, at the banquet, she saw everyone gathered together with her family, only her father by her side. Therefore, after the banquet, she quietly returned to the yard and hugged the dress her mother had once worn, carefully watching and touching it, as if she could feel her warm embrace. She huddled in a corner and cried for a long time alone. Now she still remembers that Yang Che, who was only a few months older than her at the time, quietly followed her and wiped her tears with a silk cloth. She said to her with a seriousness she had never seen before, "Aman, although my aunt cannot accompany you, you still have us. My brother and I will always be with you." After finishing speaking, the little boy pulled her to the front of the court and pulled out a delicate dagger from somewhere to deeply mark the bamboo branch according to his own size. He turned around and said, "I will be with you from now on. If you don't believe me, I will come here every year to make a mark on your birthday." The boy's words still lingered in his ear, as Li Sui rubbed the bamboo branch. The first scratch was still within her reach, but the newly carved one today was already within reach of her tiptoe. From the day he made his promise, Yang Che never broke his promise. Later, Yang Che smiled and said that if he no longer grew taller, year after year, this green bamboo would probably be cut off by his waist. However, laughter was ultimately a joke. When Yang Yan became emperor and she became empress, and Yang Che, who was secretly raising troops in Luoyang, met with her and made desperate attempts, this promise was never fulfilled again. At that time, in order to help Yang Yan secure the throne, she executed powerful officials and pacified the harem. She thought that from then on, she could assist Yang Yan in expanding his territory and achieving great success. Unexpectedly, Yang Che, who was sent to the fiefdom, sent a secret letter to her, informing her that Yang Che, who was far away in Luoyang, had collected people's hearts, concealed his armor, and gained popularity. From a young age, he had been exposed to it and told her that he would rather kill 1,000 by mistake than let one go. Therefore, she planned to take advantage of Yang Yan's longevity banquet and the opportunity for the kings to visit the capital to test Yang Che. Once those charges were confirmed, she decided to eliminate Yang Che. But she never thought that Yang Yan didn't know how to find out about this matter. Not only did she dislike her secret placement of intricacies around the princes, but she also feared her killing intent on Yang Che, the younger brother. For half a month, Yang Yan and Yang Che ate and lived together, not teaching Yang Che to leave him half a minute, leaving her at a loss. Finally, in the early morning of the same day, they secretly escorted Yang Che out of the palace. If she had known about this, she would have sent people to chase after him all the way. Yang Che, who was chasing him, fled in embarrassment, but ultimately missed the opportunity and let the tiger go back to Luoyang. The final fact told her that she didn't do anything wrong. Yang Che, there is indeed a rebellious attitude. At first, I didn't understand. These floral skirts were like rag skirts, and those little ladies didn't look as good when they wore them. Why has it been so popular in Chang'an for so long? Today, when I saw you wearing them, I finally realized that it's the same thing as pairing a sword with a hero. Upon hearing Yang Che's words, Li Sui smiled lightly. The next moment, the person in front of him reached out his hand, spread out his palm, and quietly lay a small brocade box on top. At Yang Che's signal, Li Sui opened the box, and in an instant, a fragrant but not greasy aroma came. Inside the box, there was a piece of jade the size of a palm, with an ancient and mellow color that seemed to lack the stunning appearance of top-grade jade. But it emits a faint fragrance, making people feel comfortable to smell. In my hand, I feel the warmth and coolness of a girl's skin that can be broken by a blow. This jade has the aura of all things and the essence of nature. People who wear it can eliminate pain and sadness. It has the protective effect of turning bad luck into good luck. You can wear it close to your body in the future, which is also a good omen. Upon hearing this, Li Sui looked up and touched Yang Che's shining smile. He tightly squeezed the jade in his hand and smiled, saying, "Okay." After speaking, he handed the jade to the jade slave behind him and carefully put it on for her. "I heard that Brother A gave you both the Duan ink stones that I gave. Can you tell me which one is better than Brother A's?" Looking at the playful eyes in front of him, Li Sui smiled and said, "If I say Erlang is good, what should you do if you don't give me good things in the future? But if I say you are good, I'm afraid Erlang will do the same. No matter how I calculate, I will always have fewer treasures in the future, so in my opinion, the more the better." Upon hearing the words, Yang Che's eyes moved slightly and turned to a smile. He quietly looked at the person in front of him, but suddenly reached out and attached his hand to the girl's forehead, caressing her with his palm, deliberately messing up her bun. "You are greedy and tight." Looking at the young man in front of him, who was as bright as summer sunshine, Li Sui still couldn't understand why he eventually became such an ambitious person. This world, this throne, is truly so tempting and profound. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Huaiyan's Transformation. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Huaiyan's Transformation. By nightfall, the Huaxia Xianhui Tower had already put on palace lanterns. As it was adjacent to Anxingfang and Shengifang, the banquet lights upstairs had already illuminated the residential buildings outside. Entering the hall, I saw Emperor Yuan-Qing sitting tall. As the Empress was pregnant, today's banquet arrangements were entrusted to Empress Qing Shufei, who was sitting on the lower right head of Emperor Yuan-Qing at this moment. Although she had already given birth to King Qi, she was still bright and beautiful. At this moment, Li Sui sat between Yang Yan and Yang Che, enjoying the songs and dances of the western regions with everyone. Amidst the enthusiastic drumbeats of the Dafu drum, the dancers of the western regions were dressed in fiery red dance clothes, adorned with beautiful feathers and pearls in their hair. They skillfully danced a roundabout dance with their waist and limbs, attracting bursts of applause at the banquet. At this moment, a loud shout came from outside the hall. "Captain arrives." At the banquet, there was a sudden silence, and everyone quickly got up. Even Emperor Yuan-Qing, who was receiving a toast from the courtiers, put down his wine cup, tidied up his clothes, and knelt down at the table, waiting. "Kowtow to the captain." Accompanied by the sound of everyone bowing, young Chongyuan, dressed in a round-necked purple sandalwood robe, walked in from the outside, with black hair and beautiful beards, and slanted eyebrows reaching his temples. Although he was already in middle age, due to his tall and majestic stature and years of experience in battle, he had a more confident demeanor than others as he walked. At this moment, his deep and low gaze swept over the crowd in the hall, finally landing on the cautious Emperor Yuan-Qing, turning into a smile on his lips, but he reached out and lifted it lightly. "Gentlemen, please rise up." As he spoke, young Chongyuan had already strode to the front of the holy vehicle, reaching out to pay his respects. "Your Majesty." "Captain, please get up quickly." Almost as soon as he bent his back a bit, Emperor Yuan-Qing, who was sitting on the throne, spoke out to stop him. "Please take your seat, Captain." Upon hearing the emperor's urging, young Chongyuan remained calm and turned to walk towards the empty seat under the emperor's head. However, Emperor Yuan-Qing above spoke out, "Your Majesty, who has worked hard and achieved great success, should sit with me." Zheng Shufei, who was standing beside her, naturally sensed the meaning behind it and couldn't see any signs of joy or anger as she raised her jaw towards the others. Only then did the eunuch understand and come forward to respectfully invite her. However, under the surprised gaze of the crowd, young Chongyuan sternly arched his hand and refused, "Your Majesty's grace is like the sea, but I dare not exceed my limits." As young Chongyuan repeatedly pushed back, Emperor Yuan-Qing had no choice but to give up. He swept over to Li Sui below and raised his glass and smiled, saying, "Yesterday the Empress was delighted, and today is the birthday of Princess Yongning. It's truly an even more joyful occasion. Today, we, the monarchs and ministers, take this opportunity to enjoy together without any constraints." After speaking, Emperor Qing of Yuan picked up the wine cup and turned it towards young Chongyuan. He invited from a distance and said, "Captain, please." Upon seeing this, young Chongyuan picked up a cup to pay his respects and drank with everyone. After a meal, the banquet became lively again, perhaps due to singing and dancing, or accompanied by fine wine. Looking at the dancers at the banquet, everyone was mesmerized. "I'm going to Yuqing Temple today, but my aunt is fine." The man's soft and low voice came from his ear, as if asking rather than asking. Li Sui turned to look at Yang Yan's gentle yet awkward eyes. Since yesterday's argument, Yang Yan has searched for her again in the future, and she naturally did not go to the Longao courtyard again. Even today, they had a few face-to-face meetings, and the two were not as indifferent, not as angry but not as talkative as before. Li Sui knew that with that short sentence just now, Yang Yan had already lowered his face and admitted defeat to her. Almost every time she argued with him, they would remain indifferent to each other until it ended with Yang Yan's silence. In the previous life, their marital relationship was completely consumed in the constant cold confrontation, and in the last argument, until his death, he did not say a word more to her. "Very good." The girl's words fell gently and gently in her ear. Yang Yan looked at the side of her face and finally picked up the cup of wine, saying, "Today is your birthday, and we should also have a drink." "Wishing you." I also offer you a toast, brother. Before Yang Yan could finish speaking, he saw Yang Che interjecting sideways, holding a wine cup and smiling. 16 is not young. I wish you a good son. Law soon, with a harmonious melody. Li Sui glared at Yang Che upon hearing the words, only to see Yang Che casually clinking a glass with her, drinking the wine with a smile, and then focusing his gaze on singing and dancing. Meanwhile, Yang Yan paused slightly and drank the wine in one gulp, but was secretly lost in thought. After drinking, the sound of drums and gongs suddenly came to his ears. Upon hearing the sound, Li Sui looked over and realized that at some point during the banquet, he had already switched to a variety of performances. The artist swallowing knives and spitting fire caused the women in the palace to exclaim in surprise, pushing the atmosphere to its peak. At this moment, the illusion of transforming living people at the banquet could be considered as pulling everyone's attention away. Amidst endless applause, the cabinet was once again opened, and everyone curiously looked forward. Suddenly, they heard a ding sound, and a subtle light flew out of the cabinet, shooting straight at Yang Chongyuan in the front seat. Yang Chongyuan, who was kneeling at the table, had a gloomy and slightly flickering gaze in his eyes. Almost simultaneously, he lightly turned his head and saw a silver needle darting through his temples, cutting off a few strands of hair, deeply fixed on the painted pillar behind him. Catching assassins. The hall immediately erupted with Yang Jin's violent drinking, which startled everyone to instantly come to their senses. As Yang Jin fled with Yang Chongyuan since childhood and spent time together, he naturally showed great respect for his father Yang Chongyuan. At this moment, seeing the assassins all heading towards Yang Chongyuan, the situation became even more critical. Without hesitation, he protected Yang Chongyuan and engaged in a fight with him barehanded. As everyone was panicking and fleeing, one person came out of the cabinet carrying a sword. The artists who had just been performing various dramas also changed their faces and took out their swords from the cabinet, approaching Yang Chongyuan in a swarm. Since the founding of the country, Emperor Taizu established a rule that anyone entering the Xuanwu Gate, except for the emperor, must dismount and take off their sword. At this moment, facing the fierce attack of assassins, even Yang Jin, who had extremely high martial arts skills, couldn't help but show some difficulty with bare hands. Just stay here and don't move. Watching Yang Chongyuan's father and son gradually fall behind, Yang Cheli stood up and went to guard. However, Li Sui was suddenly escorted by Yang Yan on his side and transferred to the lacquer pillar, where he was guarded by a skilled warrior named Yunu. He then stepped forward and joined the battle with his robe lifted. Compared to the caution and nervousness of Yunu and Yan Nu, as well as the helplessness of others fleeing, Li Sui appeared much calmer. I saw that although there were only a few dozen assassins, they were extremely skilled. Yang Chongyuan and his 4 sons, along with the generals in the mansion who attended the banquet, were also somewhat constrained. At the banquet, the people had just scattered and fled to the entrance of the hall. The sound of shouting and killing echoed from far to near, and the rebels in armor surrounded them, responding to the assassins inside and outside the hall. At this moment, they also fought against the guards outside the hall. Most of the people who escaped to the door were courtiers and their families. Seeing this scene at this moment, they were all scared out of their wits and had to collapse there, trapped in a dilemma. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Imperial Tomb King arrives. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Imperial Tomb King arrives. Li Sui turned his eyes and saw that Emperor Yuancheng was already stunned by the sudden scene. He could only be guarded in a corner by several guards in panic, holding Zheng Shufei, who was also afraid. His face was pale and trembling, unable to say a word. Perhaps sensing a response from outside the palace, the assassin's moves became increasingly eerie, almost deadly with a knife. Yang Chongyuan and his son snatched the sword from the deceased assassin's hands, and although they fought back with all their might, they couldn't resist the prolonged unarmed response, showing even more weakness. At this moment, General Wu Wei Jingshao, who was guarding the emperor, suddenly took out a bow and arrow from his seat, drew the strings of the bow, and almost without hesitation, turned to Yang Chongyuan, who was dealing with him. He squinted his eyes indifferently, with an indescribable murderous intent in his eyes. Zhong! Auntie exclaimed nervously, only to hear a whoosh sound. Arrows flew out quickly, piercing towards Yang Chongyuan like light. In Yang Jin's frightened gaze, the arrow had reached Yang Chongyuan's body. Just as he was trying to block it with his body, the same feather arrow flew in from outside. With a ding sound, it happened to block the arrow aimed at Yang Chongyuan and nailed it to the screen behind the throne, leaving only a trembling sound. Zheng Xiao saw failure and immediately pulled his bow again. However, before his arrow could be shot, another feather arrow was already piercing through his arm with a fierce force that almost made people hear the sound of the arrow piercing through his bones and flesh. Seeing him give up the feather arrow with a painful sound, Zheng Shufei was immediately exclaimed in shock, "I." Sensing Zheng Shufei crying and shouting to run towards Zheng Xiao, Emperor Yuancheng, who was being protected by everyone, seemed to have just realized and almost reflexively pulled Zheng Shufei tightly, not teaching her to leave for half a minute. At this moment, a resounding and powerful voice resounded from outside the hall. Chen Zhao Yi's rescue arrived late. Upon hearing this voice, everyone was shocked, even Zheng Xiao was stunned and his eyes were full of disbelief. Sure enough, a group of people wearing black armor and holding long swords almost surged into the main hall like molten iron. The sound of the friction between the armor and the swords could not be heard, and in an instant, they surrounded the rebels outside the hall and the assassins inside. Although the black armor covered half of their faces, everyone could see the coldness of the solemnity in their eyes. Zhao Yi. How could Zhao Yi, the king of Imperial tombs, who was holding a heavy army in guarding the western regions, be in Chang'an? When did he come back? According to the laws of the great Zhou dynasty, a general guarding the border must not return to the capital without the emperor's decree, otherwise he will be punished for the crime of rebellion. But now Zhao Yi. As the words fell, in the dark crowd, a man dressed in silver armor, seemingly easy-going but carrying a fierce attack, walked in from the trembling crowd. Under the moonlight, he was a handsome face that even a girl would feel ashamed of when she saw it. If such a face were paired with the brocade crown embroidered robe of a noble son, it would be as gentle as a jade prince. However, for some reason, the man in front of him walked in, carrying a pressing pressure at the moment, almost no one dares to look at it. Zhao Yi, dare you go against the imperial decree to enter Beijing? In the cold and silent hall, only Zheng Xiao angrily pointed at Zhao Yi's words of punishment. However, Zhao Yi ignored them and walked forward, clasping his fists and respectfully bowing to Emperor Yuancheng, who was being guarded on the throne. The vast hall suddenly heard the cold sound of armor colliding. "Your Majesty." The man's resounding and steady voice fell onto the main hall. Suddenly, people wearing silver armor and wielding knives inside and outside the hall all bowed to the emperor on the hall. The sound of mountain cries pushed straight from inside the hall like a tidal wave, almost shaking even the distant birds swaying their wings away. Looking at Zhao Yi below, Emperor Yuancheng was lying there in fear and uncertainty, supported by trembling internal officials. In his words, it was difficult to conceal the excitement of his remaining life and he said, "Prince Yuling, hurry up, please." In calmness, Yang Chongyuan suddenly smiled and approached calmly, without any sense of fear of life or death. He just shook his sleeves and robes with both hands, slightly bowing his hand. He said to the emperor, "Your Majesty, I have previously submitted a letter to the emperor regarding the expedition to the west against the Turks, and I have received his approval. I want the prince of the imperial tombs to guard the western regions for many years, protect the peace of the area, and have a better understanding of this expedition. Therefore, I have been ordered to summon the prince of the imperial tombs to return to the capital and work together to formulate a plan for the expedition. However, considering that the Prince of the Imperial Tombs has a considerable deterrent effect on various countries in the western regions, I have specially ordered the Prince of the Imperial Tombs to quietly return to the capital without causing any disturbance, in order to avoid any changes in the western regions. At this moment, everyone understood, Emperor Yuan Qing understood, and Jing Shao understood even more. No one knows that Yang Chongyuan is the one who covers up the sky in current court politics. Yang Chongyuan clearly recalled the Prince of Yuling, Zhao Yi, without authorization from the emperor or courtiers. Zhao Yi holds a heavy army and is highly trusted by Yang Chongyuan. When he was still a soldier in the army, he was highly regarded by Yang Chongyuan for his exceptional abilities and promoted to the position of deputy commander of Shuazhou. Later, he was granted the title of prince with a different surname by the emperor, which is naturally due to his bravery and ability to fight, and his high prestige in the military, but if it weren't for Yang Chongyuan's tacit approval, how could it be achieved? At this moment, Jing Shao could no longer care about the arrow wound on his red sleeve. He knew that he had miscalculated, and even though he had planned for a long time, he still fell into Yang Chongyuan's trap. Originally, he learned that Empress Yang was going to hold a banquet for the little princess at the Flower Calyx Tower. He felt that the time had come and predicted that Zhao Yuan was in the western regions, and the distant waters could not save the nearby fire. However, according to the regulations set by Emperor Taizu, no one was allowed to bring weapons into the palace. Although Yang Chongyuan held great power, he dared not violate the ancestral rules in public and showed his rebellion. So he prepared this carefully selected and trained wave of assassins, and joined forces with the loyal Dragon Martial Army and the Divine Strategy Army. With internal and external cooperation, he was sure to be able to kill Yang Chongyuan in one fell swoop, and tonight he could completely eradicate the Yang and Li clans. But he never expected that Yang Chongyuan would dare to secretly recall Zhao Yi. No matter how brave the Imperial Guards are, they can never compare to the Imperial Mausoleum Army fighting on the battlefield. Li Sui stood quietly by the painted pillar, and when she saw Zhao Yi, her heart became even more determined. Sure enough, yesterday on her way back from Yuqing Temple to the city, the figure she saw was Zhao Yi in front of her. It can be seen that before yesterday, Zhao Yi had already returned to Beijing. However, she was worried about startling the snake, so she hid outside the city. She only waited for her to visit her mother, and then she could follow her guard back to the city without realizing it. After all, as both she and her father, who dares to investigate the Li family's carriage and horse guard when they enter the city? This is clearly the drama of inviting the emperor into the urn. Li Sui did not know much about Zhao Yi, although she had experienced a lifetime. She only knew that Zhao Yi was the king of Imperial Tombs who was as stable as Mount Taishan and had a heavy army no matter how many dynasties he had experienced. She is in Chang'an, and he is in the western regions. The two of them didn't seem to have much social interaction, but when she took the throne as empress, she actually had a lot of fear towards Zhao Yi. Because she knew very well that with the power and ability of Zhao Yi, only Yang Chongyuan could still suppress it. At that time, her husband was benevolent and her son was young. If Zhao Yi rebelled, it would be as easy as flipping his hands. So she took the opportunity to retrieve the tiger talisman and promoted Zhao Yi to higher positions, but ordered him to stay in the western regions and not return without an edict. But he didn't expect that Zhao Yi had truly followed her orders to stay in the western regions for decades, without any disrespect towards her decision, let alone showing any resentment. Until the end, Zhao Yi did not rebel, but it was their own people who rebelled. And in the end, she was able to seek help. After much thought, there was no one else besides him, Zhao Yi. It is evident that the world is full of satire. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. The Royal Family's Xinmi. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. The royal family's Xinmi. At this moment, a strange voice suddenly rang out, and the assassin who had just used his fierce moves suddenly shed black blood on his lips and died instantly. Faced with this sudden change, Yang Chongyuan remained unmoved, but raised his hand and someone dragged the assassins down. Your Majesty was surprised. Yang Chongyuan respectfully bowed his hand and pleaded guilty, then gestured to the nearby attendants to help the frightened and pale emperor back onto the throne. What explanation should General Zheng give for today's incident? Upon hearing Yang Chongyuan's calm words, Zheng Shao sneered and glared angrily. He immediately rebuked him. Yang Chongyuan, despite the great reliance of the late emperor, you have raised the ambition of this group of wolves, controlling the court, framing loyalty and righteousness, and attempting to be like Chao Aman, who is blackmailing the emperor and causing trouble for the world. Today, I only wish I could not kill you, a national thief, to pacify the world and comfort the spirit of the late emperor. Upon hearing these resounding words, Yang Chongyuan only smiled faintly and looked at Zheng Shao as if he had seen a joke. Gradually, laughter shook the entire hall, but the smile gradually settled on Yang Chongyuan's lips. Yang Chongyuan's eyes suddenly turned cold, and he bowed respectfully to the east with a hint of sharpness in his words. Although he was speaking to Zheng Shao in front of him, Yu Guang captured the emperor's anxiety. I, Yang Chongyuan, have been entrusted by the late emperor. I dare not talk about my diligence, but I also dare to say that what I do is for the emperor's thoughts and for the people's worries. I dare not ask how the late emperor thinks of me, but after 100 years, I will kneel down in front of the late emperor to apologize. Why did I not see your true face as soon as possible, Zheng Shao, and put the emperor in danger today? This crime is truly a death sentence. Upon hearing Yang Chongyuan's insincere words and heart-wrenching words, Zheng Shao immediately angrily pointed at Yang Chongyuan and said, You. At this moment, a figure approached cautiously, and when Zheng Shao saw it, he immediately sensed something ominous. Sure enough, Yang Chongyuan sneered and turned to sweep past the crowd. Lang Lang spoke up and said, Wu Zhen, before the Holy Rider, you can rest assured to apologize. As soon as the words were spoken, the trembling person in civilian attire immediately knelt down and wept bitterly, clearing everything. Your Majesty, General Wu Wei privately raised assassins, wooed the Imperial guards, and even coerced officials, including the Minister of Works and the Imperial censor. He planned to assassinate the Grand Preceptor today, and then force His Highness the Empress to commit suicide. He appointed the son of Consort Shu as the Crown Prince to control the court and eliminate dissidents. I was really forced by my nature, and I dare not disobey. However, it is true that I cannot engage in this rebellion with General Wu Wei. Therefore, I have to report to the Grand Preceptor and beg His Majesty's forgiveness. In an instant, there was a cold silence in the hall, and Wu Zhen collapsed on the ground, almost soaking her clothes in cold sweat. Wu Zhen. You vertical person. The sharp voice almost overflowed from between Zheng Shao's teeth. Even in the midst of the soldiers' encirclement, Zheng Shao shook off the clamp and drew his sword to chop towards Wu Zhen without any hesitation. Wu Zhen let out a muffled groan and immediately fell to the ground, convulsing into a corpse. The scene shocked everyone, and immediately a courtier shouted, General Wu Wei, dare you kill the courtier in front of the palace? Zheng Shao burst out laughing at the sound, almost in a state of recklessness. What is the use of keeping shameless individuals who are greedy for life and afraid of death? Feeling everyone nervously guarding him, Yang Chongyuan never put Zheng Shao in front of him. In his eyes, the person in front of him was just the end of a strong crossbow. No, Your Majesty. I has no such intention. Please be aware of it. Seeing Zheng Shufei kneeling in front of the emperor, crying tearfully, Yang Chongyuan's gaze was indifferent, only following advice and facing Zheng Shao. General Wu Wei, at this moment in front of Xinjia, it's better to be guilty. Upon hearing this, Zheng Shao shook off his restraints and instead knelt down on the ground with a bang sound, bowing to the stunned emperor on his seat and saying, Your Majesty, today's matter is indeed planned by me. I will handle it one by one, but I am only for the sake of clearing the emperor's side and not for rebellion. I have no connection with Lady Shu today. If the treacherous and sycophantic person is not removed now, it is my fault. Wu Zhen is a weak and upright person, and what he said is not the truth. I hope your majesty can learn from it. Watching the weeping lady next to her, who was about to take her breath away, and Jing Shao, who was deeply buried and bowing before him, full of decadence, Emperor Yuan Cheng was stunned for a long time. In the end, he still looked at Yang Chongyuan standing there in embarrassment, his lips pursed and he seemed to want to say something. Raising assassins and colluding with the Imperial army, General Wu Wei casually wants to take on such a scene alone. Could it be that he has made His Majesty and made me a 3-year-old child in full court? Besides, today's banquet was personally organized by Lady Shu. If it weren't for her instructions, how could these assassins avoid layers of investigation and assassinate in front of your majesty? General Wu Wei, if you reveal the conspirators today, your Jing family may still have a glimmer of vitality. You're delusional. Faced with Yang Chongyuan's seemingly heartfelt words, Jing Shao almost angrily refuted them. However, Yang Chongyuan was not angry about this and did not say much. Instead, he turned to look at the emperor and respectfully arched his hand, with a hint of doubt in his eyes. Your Majesty, there is one more thing that I only learned yesterday. It was originally related to the majesty of the emperor, and I wanted to have a banquet to dismiss Qin Yu from His Majesty. However, the assassination was just a moment ago, and I thought I had to say it now. Seeing that the emperor could not speak, Yang Chongyuan turned to look at Yang Jin beside him. Yang Jin went down knowingly and soon saw an attendant and a physician carefully following Yang Jin in, kneeling on the ground. Li Sui watched this scene quietly, and sure enough, everything was like a play, walking back through the previous life. And at this moment, she is just a spectator. Chaoan, a servant in the living quarters, kowtowed to His Majesty. Compared to the panicked emperor on the throne, Yang Chongyuan, who was standing under him at this moment, seemed more relaxed, as if tonight was truly an ordinary birthday banquet. Your Majesty, the son of Lady Shu, King Qi, was not born prematurely, but at full term. As the words fell, everyone present fell like a bolt from the blue, and Qi's gaze fell on the shocked Lady Shu. A bunch of nonsense. Feeling Jing Zhao's anger, the eunuch was so frightened that she trembled like a sieve of bran and said, I dare not speak nonsense. I have always been responsible for your Majesty's daily life records. When Lady Shu received the favor of Cheng Sheng for the last time before she became pregnant, she had not had any sexual intercourse for 2 months. After speaking, the eunuch quickly pointed to the nearby physician and said, Dr. Wang. Dr. Wang knows about this matter. In the silence, Wang Tai also hurriedly said, Your Majesty, what this internal official said is true. When I first detected the happy pulse for Consort Shu, her monthly affairs had not yet arrived for 3 months. However, Consort Shu had always been well regulated before, and such a situation had never occurred before. At first, I thought it was due to encountering happiness, but I did not detect the happy pulse, so I continued to regulate it, but it was not effective. Later, when I detected the pregnant pulse for Consort Shu, I found that it was different from the history of Tong. If we calculate according to the history of Tong, Consort Shu should have been pregnant for 1 month. How did Consort Shu manage the 3-month affair? Not yet. It wasn't until concubine Shu suddenly gave birth prematurely at 8 months old that I felt there was something suspicious. A few days ago, when I searched through a rural medical book, I discovered a folk needle technique that could briefly seal a woman's pregnancy pulse, making it difficult for people to notice when the last word of the imperial physician fell in her ear. Li Sui's eyes twitched slightly, feeling her breathing suddenly stop. Amidst the screams of everyone, she fixed her gaze on the Wang imperial physician in the hall, and the past were almost surging in. The elder sister from her past life was also present at this banquet. She was frightened by the assassin and had a restless heart. Regardless of her birthday, she accompanied her to the legislative yuan to take care of her all night. The night's affairs were related to the royal secrets, and many people were dealt with cleanly that night. The next day, no rumors were heard. Even she was just a little probing from Yang Yenyang Che's mouth. She still stands here, experiencing things she had never experienced in her previous life, but suddenly understands. Understand why Empress Xiao, who was pregnant in her previous life, was unaware, and why their mother and son were born and died under her cane responsibility. At this moment, she silently watched and listened, but her hands fiercely embedded her nails in the palm of her hand. It can be seen that the person who falsely accused her of poisoning Yang Yan and framing Empress Xiao in her previous life was one of the courtiers of the aristocratic family at today's banquet. Because besides them, the people around can no longer live to see tomorrow's sun. Empty talk and nonsense, where does evidence come from? At this moment, Shengmengdie, who had been silent all along, finally couldn't hold back and raised his voice to drink. Upon hearing these words, young Chongyuan did not speak, but sneered with a snort. A courtier behind him spoke impartially, "There are twists and turns in right and wrong, so I must investigate." "Okay." The resounding sound immediately trembled above the main hall, and young Chongyuan seemed to be waiting for this moment. He arched his hand calmly and said, "Your Majesty, it is now related to the royal bloodline. I kindly request your Majesty to order that Consort Shu be wronged and send someone to immediately investigate her dormitory for verification." As soon as these words were spoken, Emperor Yuan Cheng's heart was immediately placed in an icy cold current, gradually turning from warm to cold. However, the people below had never waited for him to speak before turning around, and someone had already gone towards the inner palace. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Watching from the Wall. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Watching from the Wall. When a book about the technique of sealing pregnancy meridians was found in the palace of Lady Shu, everything became self-evident. However, in an instant, Lady Shufei, who had just gained her throne in affection, became a pitiful person on the brink of death. She trembled and knelt at the emperor's feet, tightly gripping the corner of his robe because she understood that the person in front of her was the only vitality she could hold on to. Perhaps due to the unusual silence, the grand hall with many people standing at this moment feels extremely empty, and one can only hear Lady Shu's almost crazy crying and pleading voice. "Your Majesty, I don't have any, I really don't. King Qi is your child." The piercing voice of the consort hummed around the emperor's ear. Facing the courtiers who were either silent, evading, or indifferent, he sat there trembling like a puppet that wouldn't even move. The truth of the facts is no longer important. Looking at the people below who seemed to be subservient to him, he had already felt a sense of powerlessness. He, as the emperor, has always been a joke. What can he do? At this moment, a burst of baby cries, as if casting a spell, made Lady Shu quiet. She saw the little Prince Qi being held by a wet nurse and coming to the front of the palace. The emperor's pupils suddenly shrank, and Lady Shu immediately got up to grab the child, but was caught by the hem of her skirt in a hurry and fell to the ground. Her hairpin ring fell to the ground, showing no signs of spoiling her anymore. "Young Chongyuan, what are you doing? Are you plotting rebellion?" Faced with Zheng Zhao's question, young Chongyuan seemed to have not heard of it. He shook his head at the approaching Qi king and sighed with some empathy. "I used to respect General as a loyal minister, but now you, a child of chaotic royal bloodline, are attempting to kill the palace and coerce His Majesty to make him crown prince. It is truly heartbreaking." Speaking of the last sentence, young Chongyuan slowly spilled word by word from his lips, every word killing his heart. Through young Chongyuan's gaze, Zheng Zhao saw that the words on the bottom of his abyssal eyes were nothing more than the words of complete annihilation. At this moment, he looked around, and wherever his gaze could reach, he quietly lowered his head to avoid it, just like the Tianzi faction led by Shengmengdie, who only had a pale face and refused to say a word more. He should have anticipated this scene long ago. Now standing on this hall, there are a few who are either for their own power and family status, or for the Shengguan clan. At this moment, they are also happy to watch from the sidelines, watching young Chongyuan eliminate King Qi, in order to pave the way for the Shengguan Jiaoyi in the palace. In the silence, he seemed to be gradually drained of something, and his decadent and hunched body, with its resolute and helpless appearance, gave off a faint sense of sadness. Watching the weak child crying incessantly in Yang Chongyuan's arms, the heart of Emperor Yuan Sheng on the throne felt as if he was being tightly gripped and pulled by someone. His hands under his narrow sleeves trembled with nervousness, and finally he couldn't help but plead and say, "Captain. Your Majesty." As the speaker spoke, Yang Chongyuan suddenly arched his hand and drank loudly, exploding in the ears of Emperor Yuan Sheng like thunder. It makes people tremble with fear, yet it is like a sudden enlightenment. I am fortunate enough to have the support of the late emperor in this lifetime, but I never intended to place your Majesty in such a situation due to personal negligence. I know your Majesty is kind, but now it is related to the royal family's bloodline. As for the country, I hope your Majesty is cautious. Otherwise, even if I go underground in the future, how can I meet the late emperor and our ancestors in the Zhou dynasty? Do I want to see your Majesty laugh at the world because of this treacherous concubine and disorderly minister? Yang Chongyuan's words resounded loudly in the main hall, and the next moment he suddenly knelt down. Almost at the same time, except for the Tianzi sect led by Shang'an Qing, who remained silent, everyone behind him knelt down without hesitation, as if he had been forced to do so countless times in the court. Your Majesty, please think twice. Upon hearing this deafening sound, Emperor Cheng of Yuan sat there, looking at the people below with cold palms and unable to say a word. The night breeze gradually cooled down, causing the silk lamps outside the palace to sway and make noise. Zheng Xiao looked at the almost insane but pulled by the palace people, Lady Shu, trembling and shedding tears, eyes full of hope looking at his wife. There is also a grandson lying in Yang Chongyuan's arms, crying incessantly. Finally, with a loud bang, he knelt down and knew that today he was the fish on the chopping board, to be slaughtered by Yang Chongyuan. He also knew that as long as Yang Chongyuan gave a command, his daughter, his grandson, even him, would all die in this hall. The guilty minister is willing to confess his accomplices and only requests your Majesty to spare King Qi and Lady Shu. They are innocent. Upon hearing Zheng Xiao say these words as if he had exhausted all his strength, someone present had already changed their expression. Yang Chongyuan was not surprised, but rather settled down. With a sigh, he took out a folded piece of paper from his sleeve and looked at Zheng Xiao with regret in his eyes. His hands trembled carelessly, leaving only the paper gently swaying in the wind. I respect General Zheng's achievements and originally intended to provide him with an opportunity to stand up for his crimes. However, General Zheng remains stubborn and continues to deceive His Majesty for the criminals. Wu Zhan has already recorded the conspirators here, and I kindly request your Majesty to take action. Yang Chongyuan. When the light and flowing paper was handed to the emperor's desk, Zheng Xiao became violent and rushed towards Yang Chongyuan. If it weren't for the guards tightly holding it, he would have already eaten its flesh and bones, while countless people below were already shivering. The emperor trembled and reached out to the paper, only to touch it, and suddenly heard the solemn and emotionless voice resounding. Consort Zheng, who goes against women's ethics, has attracted foreign ministers with the intention of plotting to harm the central palace and undermine the foundation of the country. Her legal principles are difficult to tolerate, and she should be punished. Upon hearing the last word, the emperor was so shocked that he withdrew his hand. Before he could say more, a guard headed towards Xing Shufei, who had fallen to the ground and was stunned before retreating. Your Majesty, Your Majesty, Your Majesty save me, Your Majesty save me. The woman's mournful voice suddenly rang out from the hall, and Emperor Yuan Qing could only silently watch as Lady Shu, who had just grabbed the corner of his robe and begged, was dragged down by Xing Sheng. The almost twisted voice made everyone present tremble and dare not look up. The next moment, the soldier raised the bow in his hand and immediately wrapped it around Lady Shu's neck. Captain. The emperor spoke out urgently, but what he saw was Yang Chongyuan, as well as the cold, ruthless, or trembling gaze of the courtiers behind him. Like a big mountain, the green thread pressed tightly in front of him, making it impossible for him to breathe. "Your Majesty, Your Majesty." Intermittent sounds overflowed from the woman's throat, and Emperor Yuanqing trembled as he sat on the throne, almost ready to collapse, as if he had been pinned down by life. He could only look at the scene in front of him with fear. As she watched Lady Shu's face turn pale and her hands struggle helplessly, tears streaming down her cheeks, the executioner clenched his bow as if he had not seen it before. Zheng Xiao, whose mouth was sealed, was pressed there like that, watching as the bowstrings pulled deep into Lady Shu's neck. From the beginning of her struggle to the end, she silently lowered her hand and fell to the ground. General Weiwu is suspected of plotting to rebel against his allies and has been handed over to the 3rd Division for joint review. As the words fell, Zheng Xiao's hair, which had already been bound, was disheveled and he looked at him like a madman. His wrinkled eyes were already swollen and tearful, and he was carried away without any struggle, feeling like a lost dog. Glancing at the emperor who was stunned on the seat, young Chongyuan looked at the child in his hand with deep eyes and calmly said to the emperor, "Son of the guilty wife Sheng, please personally take action." Upon hearing the word personally, the people on the seat felt like they had received a hot potato, watching the cold and disheveled woman lying there, as if she had broken down her past beauty. At this moment, she could only be dragged down by the palace officials without any concern. Emperor Yuancheng's hands trembled, his lips closed, but he couldn't speak. Everyone present knows that he has fallen into a dilemma at this moment. But they are still pressuring him to make the final decision. "Your Majesty." Finally, in the quiet hall, a voice suddenly sounded from the banquet. Li Sui, dressed in a tattered floral skirt, walked out of the crowd. Compared to many women at the banquet, he did not tremble or fear, but calmly bowed. Looking up slowly, he said, "Today's banquet is due to Yongning." Yongning dares to speak up. Now that His Highness the Empress is blessed with a dragon fetus, it is a blessing for the world. When the world is granted amnesty and celebrated together, the blame for today's incident lies with General Wu Wei's rebellion and Consort Shu's rebellion. Their sins are naturally unforgivable, but the child is just a burden on others. If tonight's incident is reported, it would also damage the rigor of the royal bloodline. At this point, the young girl below looked straight at her and said calmly, "Why don't we ask your Majesty to grant amnesty to the world, strip this child of his title, and send him to the Taoist temple? He will serve the gods and Buddhas day by day, redeeming the sins of his grandfather and mother from rebellion. I believe people will also appreciate your Majesty's holy grace." Upon hearing these words, everyone couldn't help but be stunned. For them, no one dared to say these pleading words. Faced with the strange gazes of the crowd, Li Sui was convinced that Yang Chongyuan's scene of inviting the emperor to the urn today was nothing more than a warning to the emperor. Although the charges of chaotic royal bloodline have arisen, the emperor understands who the Qi king is and whose bloodline it belongs to. Yang Chongyuan understands, and everyone understands. As the saying goes, when a rabbit is in a hurry, it will still bite people. There are still Shengguan clans waiting to reap the benefits of fishing, and Yang Chongyuan will not openly kill King Qi at this time, completely infuriating the emperor and giving people a handle. If that's the case, I really fell for Shengguan Ji's ambition. Fish die and the net is broken, jade and stone are burned, which is not what Yang Chongyuan wants now. Looking at today's banquet, it was nothing more than the Crown Prince Chen and the powerful ministers Yang and Li. Her identity may be the most awkward, but it is also the most suitable person to say these words. In Yang Chongyuan's eyes, the royal family has no right to plead, and the Yang family cannot plead for the Chen family at this moment. Only she is alone. At this moment, these words were just a suitable gift from her to the emperor and Yang Chongyuan. Emperor Yuanqing fixed his gaze on the unassuming young girl below, and finally cautiously looked at Yang Chongyuan, who was silent beside him, and probed, "Captain, what do you think?" Seeing the emperor like this, Yang Chongyuan naturally arched his hand and said, "But it's up to your Majesty to take action." At this moment, Emperor Cheng of Yuan looked at the infant child, unable to bear it and struggled for a long time. Finally, he averted his gaze and stopped looking at the child, saying in an imperceptible tone, "Consort Zheng, colluded with her relatives to engage in rebellion, deposed her as a commoner, and executed her. Now that the Empress is pregnant, she is granted amnesty to the world. Considering the young age of King Qi, she was demoted to a commoner and placed in the Yuqing temple. No amnesty can be granted." The emperor's words fell, and everyone knelt down and shouted, Your Majesty is blessed." When Chang'an, the confidant beside Yang Chongyuan, picked up the child and, with Yang Chongyuan's signal, the sound of silk and bamboo at the banquet rose again. Faced with the enchanting dancer, everyone lost interest in appreciating her. As Li Sui watched the crowd pretending to be toasting, she lazily retreated. When she arrived at the steps under the corridor of the flower calyx tower, she indeed saw Chang'an holding the Qi king. Upon hearing the sound, Chang'an turned to bow to Li Sui. Li Sui nodded and then looked at Prince Qi in his arms, saying, "Are you going to send Prince Qi out of the palace?" "Princess Hui, that's right." Looking at Chang'an's humble and respectful appearance, Li Sui calmly looked at the distant pavilions and towers, as if he had lost his mind. Upon seeing this, Chang'an couldn't help but follow his gaze. In a moment, the girl's words drifted lightly into the wind. It is said that the founding emperor stipulated that only a prince with a proper appearance and intact body is eligible to become an emperor. This sentence seemed to be speaking to Feng, as if speaking to him. Chang'an's body was slightly stunned, and the next moment he heard the person in front of him turn his head again and calmly say, "You say, if it were a prince who cannot speak, could this life be safer and smoother?" "Princess." Chang'an trembled and spoke out, his gaze pointing towards Li Sui in the shadow. Finally, he lowered his voice carefully and said, "Yes, according to the order of the Grand Commandant, after King Qi leaves the palace, he will quietly eliminate him." Upon hearing this, Li Sui was not surprised. Due to the current situation, Yang Chongyuan's tolerance for King Qi being alive at this time did not mean that he could tolerate him growing up to become a major fear for himself. For him, only dead people are the safest. Li Sui lowered his gaze and looked at the quiet child in Chang'an's arms. He calmly reached out and gently caressed the child's soft cheeks, while the little person in the swaddle also chuckled. A child who cannot speak is of no use to others. If he dies quietly, he can become a sharp weapon for others to punish him. Now that the Shangwan clan is eyeing him, why should they hold on to this weapon? After speaking, Li Sui looked at the child in front of him who had a slight blood relationship with her. Finally, he took a look at those black, pure, and clean eyes like grape beads. He then withdrew his gaze and looked at the twinkling stars in the sky, saying, "You go." Upon hearing this, Chang'an looked up at Li Sui's calm and calm-side face. He dared not step back with ease. He was still trembling as he held on to the Qi king, thinking that Princess Yongning's method in front of him was not a good one. Therefore, he dared to make up his mind and expressed gratitude, saying, "Thank you for your guidance." Upon hearing this, Li Sui turned aside and watched as Chang'an entered the palace again. He then walked to the corner tower and leaned against the railing to gaze into the distance, where a gentle breeze brushed against her hair. The night was as cool as water, and the wind made his hair itch as it brushed against his cheeks. When Li Sui raised his hand to gather his hair, he saw Chang'an hurriedly walk out of the main hall again, respectfully bowing to her from afar, and quickly walked into the endless darkness. Li Sui smiled and turned to look at the thousands of lights in the distance. She knew that Yang Chongyuan had agreed. And all she can do is this. Amen. End of this chapter.